The first thing Prince Adrian Valcrest heard after opening his eyes was the sound of people deciding how he should die, not whether he would die. How? A blade through the ribs would be clean. Poison would be quieter. Throwing him from the eastern tower might look like another drunken accident. The voices came from behind the carved oak doors of his bedroom, low and confident, spoken by men who clearly believed the prince inside was still unconscious. Adrian stared at the silk canopy above him, every muscle frozen. His final memory belonged to another world. Concrete dust. The metallic scream of artillery. He had been Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Cole, a military strategist assigned to an international defense unit during a brutal urban conflict. He had spent 15 years studying logistics, combined arms warfare, defensive doctrine, drone reconnaissance, mechanized assaults, and the ugly truth behind every great victory. Wars were not won by heroic speeches. They were won by ammunition, fuel, intelligence, food, discipline, communication, and the ability to destroy the enemy before the enemy understood what was happening. Then a missile had struck his command center. The world had gone white. Now he was here, in the body of Prince Adrian Valcrest, seventh son of Emperor Cassian Valcrest, ruler of the Ardinian Empire. And judging by the trembling weakness in his limbs, this body had never lifted anything heavier than a wine cup. Fragments of memories flooded his mind. The original Adrian had been famous across the imperial capital as the most useless prince alive. No sword talent, no magical affinity, no political backing, no battlefield experience, no prestigious maternal clan. He was mocked by nobles, ignored by generals, despised by servants, and treated by his brothers as a convenient punching bag. His father had not spoken to him directly in 3 years. His engagement had recently been broken by Lady Eveline Rosenthal, who publicly declared that marrying Adrian would be more humiliating than marrying a common stable boy. The entire capital had laughed. The original prince had returned to his palace, drowned himself in alcohol, and collapsed. Apparently someone had decided humiliation was not enough. They wanted him removed permanently. Adrian slowly sat upright. A strange sensation pulsed behind his eyes. Then a cold mechanical voice echoed inside his mind. It informed him that compatibility with the host had reached completion. A military authority system had awakened. Adrian's expression changed. The voice continued calmly, explaining that his new ability could convert military achievement, territory, strategic resources, and national influence into command authority. That authority could be used to unlock knowledge, equipment blueprints, industrial technologies, military doctrines, medical systems, communications infrastructure, weapons platforms, and eventually complete modern military units. Adrian's heart began pounding. The system was not handing him an army. Not yet. It was giving him something far more dangerous. A road toward building one. The first available package contained basic infantry doctrine, modern field medicine, standardized logistics, primitive radio engineering principles adapted to local materials, improved black powder manufacturing, rifled firearms design, artillery mathematics, steel production methods, and military organization modeled on professional standing armies. Adrian almost laughed. Outside his door, the assassins were discussing where to dump his corpse. Inside, a prince considered how to manufacture rifles. The door opened. 3 men entered. The first wore the uniform of the royal guard. The second carried a physician's leather bag. The third was Adrian's own chamberlain. All 3 stopped when they saw him sitting upright. The chamberlain's face turned pale. "Your Highness," Adrian smiled faintly. "Disappointance." The guard reached for his sword. That was enough. Adrian threw himself sideways as the blade flashed from its sheath. His new body was weak, but his old instincts were not. The sword cut through the mattress. Adrian grabbed the heavy silver candle holder beside the bed and smashed it into the attacker's wrist. Bone cracked. The sword dropped. Adrian caught it before it hit the floor. One movement. One thrust. The blade entered beneath the guard's jaw. The man collapsed instantly. The physician stumbled backward. The chamberlain screamed. Adrian pointed the bloody sword at him. "Lock the door." The chamberlain shook uncontrollably. "Your Highness, I can explain." "Lock it." He obeyed. The physician suddenly reached into his bag. Adrian kicked the bag away. A small vial rolled across the carpet. Poison. Adrian looked at it, then at the physician. So that was the backup plan. The physician fell to his knees. "Who ordered it?" "I cannot say." Adrian stepped closer. The physician swallowed. Adrian did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply placed the sword against the man's throat and applied enough pressure for a thin line of blood to appear. "Who ordered it?" The answer came immediately. "Prince Roland." Adrian's eyes narrowed. Roland Valcrest, fourth prince, commander of the Imperial Lion Guard, one of the strongest candidates for the throne. The chamberlain collapsed to his knees as well. We had no choice. Prince Roland's people said they would kill our families. Adrian stared at them. The old Adrian might have begged for answers. The new Adrian thought in terms of assets. A frightened servant with access to palace information was an intelligence source. A physician connected to a prince's assassination network was evidence. A dead guard was leverage. He lowered the sword. You both live. They looked up in disbelief. For now, Adrian ordered them to move the body behind the curtains. Then he washed the blood from his hands, changed clothes, and studied himself in the mirror. Pale skin, dark hair, sharp blue eyes, a face too delicate for war. That could be useful. People underestimated beautiful fools. Adrian intended to remain one for as long as possible. Hours later, an imperial messenger arrived. The emperor had summoned all princes to the Hall of Crowns. Adrian understood immediately. Something had changed. The great hall was filled with nobles, military commanders, priests, ministers, and members of the imperial family. At the center sat Emperor Cassian. The emperor was old, but nothing about him appeared weak. His silver hair fell to his shoulders, and a deep scar crossed one side of his face. 7 princes stood below the throne. Adrian entered last. Whispers followed him. The drunkard came. Did he even know there was a meeting? I heard Lady Eveline rejected him. Poor bastard. Prince Roland stood near the front wearing golden armor. Their eyes met. For half a second, Roland's confident expression cracked. Adrian smiled. Roland knew. The assassination had failed good. Let him wonder why. The emperor struck the floor once with his staff. The hall fell silent. Our northern frontier has collapsed. A map was unveiled. Several border territories had been marked in black. The kingdom of Dravik had invaded with nearly 50,000 soldiers. 3 imperial fortresses had fallen. 2 legions had been destroyed. Panic spread through the hall. The emperor continued. We need commanders. Every prince immediately straightened. This was not merely a war. It was an opportunity. Victory at the frontier could transform a prince into the leading heir. The first prince stepped forward. I request command of the Western Army. The second demanded the royal cavalry. Roland requested 20,000 troops and authority over the central defense line. Then the emperor looked at Adrian. And you? Laughter rippled through the hall. Everyone expected him to ask for nothing. Perhaps wine, perhaps permission to return to bed. Adrian studied the map. The northern frontier contained mountains, forests, rivers, narrow roads, and 3 major supply routes. The invading army had advanced rapidly, too rapidly. That meant their supply lines were stretched. Their forces were concentrated. Their commanders were confident. Perfect. Adrian stepped forward. I request the abandoned province of Greyhaven. The laughter stopped. Greyhaven was a wasteland. Once a mining region, it had been devastated by decades of war. Its fortifications were ruined. Its population had fallen below 20,000. Bandits controlled the roads. Its fields barely produced enough grain to prevent starvation. Even worse, Greyhaven sat directly in the path of the Dravik invasion. Prince Roland laughed loudly. You want Greyhaven? Roland spread his arms. Why not simply ask father for an executioner? More laughter. Adrian ignored him. I request full military and administrative authority over the province. The emperor leaned forward. How many soldiers? None. Now even the ministers looked confused. Adrian continued. I want the criminals sentenced to labor camps, the dismissed soldiers in the capital, the wounded veterans no longer receiving military pay, and permission to recruit commoners. The Minister of War frowned. That rabble would not survive a cavalry charge. Adrian looked at him. Then I will teach them not to stand in front of one. A few nobles laughed nervously. The emperor did not. What else? Ownership rights over all abandoned mines and workshops inside Greyhaven. Granted, freedom from imperial taxation for 3 years. Murmurs exploded. The emperor raised one hand, granted, and 10,000 gold crowns. Roland nearly choked. Adrian turned to him. You requested 20,000 trained soldiers, cavalry, siege equipment, royal engineers, and 6 months of military supplies. He looked back at the emperor. I am cheaper. For the first time, Emperor Cassian smiled. Granted. 3 days later, Adrian left the capital. No crowds gathered to say farewell. No knights rode beside his carriage. No noble banners followed him. He traveled north with 6 wagons, a group of disgraced veterans, several hundred prisoners, blacksmiths recruited from debtor districts, a handful of physicians, and enough gold to either build a small army or finance a very comfortable escape. Everyone assumed he had chosen escape. They were wrong. Greyhaven appeared on the horizon after 12 days. The provincial capital looked dead. Broken walls, towers, mud roads. Starving civilians, rusting workshops, abandoned mines. A fortress that looked as if a strong wind could finish what enemy armies had started. Adrian stepped from the carriage. The governor approached nervously. "Your Highness, welcome to Greyhaven." Adrian looked across the ruined city. "How much grain do we have?" "Perhaps 2 months, iron?" "Several mines remain usable, but production is low." "Coal?" The governor blinked. "Coal?" "The black stone miners throw away mountains of it." Adrian smiled. "Good." He turned toward the gathered veterans, prisoners, craftsmen, and civilians. Nobody cheered. They looked exhausted, hopeless, broken. Exactly like raw material before refinement. Adrian climbed onto a shattered stone fountain. "You were sent here because the Empire believes you are useless." Several prisoners looked up. "The nobles think Greyhaven is useless." More faces turned toward him. "The generals think wounded soldiers are useless." Veterans tightened their fists. "They think criminals are useless. Poor farmers are useless. Failed blacksmiths are useless. Abandoned miners are useless." Adrian paused. "I know something about being called useless." Silence covered the square. "So I will make you a promise." His voice hardened. "Anyone who works will eat. Anyone who learns will be paid. Anyone who fights for Greyhaven will receive land. And anyone who threatens this province will discover what useless people can become when someone finally teaches them how to win." That night, the military authority system responded. Command authority increased. A new technology tier became available. Adrian reviewed the unlocked designs until sunrise. Simple rifled muskets, standardized cartridges, field systems, medical sanitation, uniform manufacturing, military drilling, fortification engineering, the foundations of industrial warfare. He selected the first production package. Across Greyhaven, abandoned furnaces burned again. Blacksmiths received measurements accurate to fractions they had never used before. Carpenters began producing identical rifle stocks. Miners returned to iron and coal deposits. Prisoners rebuilt roads. Veterans became instructors. Farmers were paid to deliver grain directly to military warehouses. Adrian created quartermaster units before cavalry, engineers before elite guards, hospitals before palaces. His officers were confused. Then his army began transforming. Men who once trained randomly with swords now moved in formations. Every soldier received the same equipment. Every squad had defined responsibilities. Every company had designated medics. Every battalion maintained written supply records. Every commander learned maps. Every road was measured. Every bridge was inspected. Every warehouse was counted. Greyhaven became a machine. 3 months later, the first rifle was completed. Adrian held it personally. The weapon was crude compared to what existed in his previous world. But compared to bows, crossbows, and smoothbore hand cannons, it was revolutionary. He carried it outside the workshop. A wooden target stood 200 meters away. Several officers watched. Captain Marcus, an old veteran with one eye, frowned. "Your Highness, even a skilled archer would struggle at that distance." Adrian raised the rifle. He fired. The explosion echoed across the yard. The target splintered. Nobody spoke. Adrian lowered the weapon. Captain Marcus stared at the hole. "How many can we make?" Adrian smiled. "That is the correct question." Weeks later, scouts arrived with urgent news. A Dravic force was approaching Greyhaven. 8,000 soldiers, heavy cavalry, battle mages, siege troops. Their commander was General Volker, a man famous for massacring cities that refused surrender. The provincial council panicked. Several officials suggested abandoning Greyhaven. Adrian refused. "How many trained troops do we have?" he asked. Marcus answered. 3,000 infantry, 400 engineers, 12 artillery crews. And rifles? 2,700. Cannons? 12 operational. Adrian looked at the map. General Volkar had 8,000 soldiers. More than double his number. Better cavalry. Experienced officers. Battle mages capable of destroying traditional formations. To every noble in the Empire, Greyhaven was already lost. Adrian saw something else. A testing ground. He ordered trenches dug along the northern approach. Artillery positions were hidden behind elevated earthworks. Rifle companies were arranged in layered firing lines. Engineers placed sharpened obstacles across cavalry routes. Supply carts delivered ammunition before dawn. Medical stations waited behind the defensive line. Every soldier received exact instructions. No heroic charges. No duels. No breaking formation. No chasing fleeing enemies without orders. The next morning, the Dravic army appeared. Thousands of soldiers covered the valley. Black banners moved beneath the wind. Armored cavalry formed at the center. Battle mages gathered behind them. General Volkar rode forward beneath a crimson standard. A messenger approached Greyhaven carrying terms. Surrender, Prince Adrian, open the gates, and the city will be spared. Adrian stood above the defensive line wearing a simple dark military coat. No, the messenger laughed. General Volkar has 8,000 men. Adrian looked toward the riflemen waiting silently inside the trenches. I know, you have barely 3,000. Then why refuse? Adrian's expression became cold. Because your general brought 8,000 soldiers into range. The messenger did not understand. Soon he would. General Volker raised his sword. The Dravic cavalry began to move. Hundreds became thousands. The earth shook. Greyhaven's defenders watched the armored wave approach. Some recruits trembled. Captain Marcus shouted for them to hold. 400 meters, 300, 250. The enemy knights lowered their lances. Battle mages prepared spells behind them. Adrian raised one hand. Every cannon crew waited 200 meters. The cavalry believed victory was seconds away. Adrian dropped his hand. The world exploded. 12 cannons fired simultaneously. Iron tore through the cavalry formation. Horses collapsed. Armor shattered. Men disappeared beneath smoke and blood. Before the survivors understood what had happened, the first rifle line fired. A wall of thunder crossed the battlefield. Dozens of knights fell. Then the second line fired. Then the third. The cavalry charge disintegrated. General Volkar stared from the rear. For the first time in his career, he was watching warfare from another age, and Prince Adrian had only just begun. General Volkar had spent 27 years winning wars. He had shattered mountain clans with cavalry. He had burned fortified cities until their governors crawled out, begging for mercy. He had personally killed 3 enemy commanders in single combat, and once broken an army twice his size by striking through a frozen river before dawn. But nothing in those 27 years had prepared him for the sound coming from Greyhaven. Thunder. Not from the sky. From men. Again and again, flashes erupted from the prince's defensive line, each followed by another wave of death. Volkar watched armored knights tumble from their saddles before they could even reach sword range. His cavalry was supposed to be the hammer of the Dravic kingdom. Instead, it was being butchered like livestock. Battle mages forward, he roared. His officers reacted instantly. Dozens of robed figures advanced behind shield-bearing infantry. Mana gathered in the air. Scarlet flames formed above one mage's hands. Another summoned spears of ice. A third began shaping a massive stone projectile intended to crush the Greyhaven defenses. Prince Adrian observed them through a brass field telescope. Range? Captain Marcus answered immediately. Approximately 400 meters. Adrian lowered the telescope. Artillery battery 2. Mage explosive shells. Marcus hesitated. The shells are still experimental. Then today they stopped being experimental. The command passed down the line. Artillery crews adjusted elevation. Gunners measured distance. Powder charges were loaded. Fuses were cut. Adrian had forced them to practice this sequence hundreds of times. At first, the old soldiers had complained. They called it obsessive. They said real battle was too chaotic for precise calculations. Adrian had answered with one simple sentence. Chaos belonged to the side that failed to prepare. The cannons fired. The first shell landed short. Dirt erupted. The second exploded among advancing infantry. The third struck directly inside the mage formation. The battlefield became fire and shattered earth. Several mages disappeared instantly. The survivors lost concentration. Half-formed spells collapsed. A burning sphere detonated prematurely and consumed 2 Dravic soldiers standing beside its caster. Volkar's face twisted. Spread them out. Too late. Adrian had already predicted the response. Rifle companies. Priority targets are anyone wearing robes. The marksman shifted. The next volley was not aimed at the infantry. It tore into the surviving mages. A sorcerer who could burn 50 men alive never finished his spell, because a rifle ball struck his chest from a distance where he believed himself untouchable. Another mage raised a magical barrier. 3 bullets shattered against it. Then 6, then 12, the barrier flickered. The next volley broke through. The mage fell. General Volkar finally understood the terrifying principle behind Adrian's army. The prince did not care who was strongest. He did not care who had noble blood. He did not care who possessed legendary swordsmanship. He did not care whether one warrior could defeat 10 ordinary men. His weapons made ordinary men dangerous. His organization made dangerous men replaceable. And his doctrine concentrated the strength of hundreds onto a single target until individual greatness became meaningless. Volkar clenched his teeth. Send the infantry. His deputy stared at him. The cavalry has already taken severe losses. Send everyone. Thousands of Dravic infantry surged forward. Adrian watched them come. Unlike the cavalry, they advanced behind large wooden shields. Their commanders had learned something. Not enough. Hold fire. The Greyhaven soldiers waited. 180 meters. 150. The Dravic soldiers shouted. Their shields formed a moving wall. 120. Adrian raised his hand. First rank. Rifles emerged above the trench. Fire smoke covered the line. Bullets punched through wood. Men collapsed. Second rank. Another volley. Third rank. The Dravic formation slowed but continued. They had numbers. They had courage. They had been taught that courage solved everything. Adrian knew better. Courage without tactical advantage was simply a faster road to the grave. Fall back to secondary positions. The order shocked several young officers. They were winning. Why retreat? Marcus understood immediately. Do it. The first Greyhaven line withdrew through prepared communication trenches. The Dravic soldiers saw movement and began cheering. They're running! Greyhaven is breaking! The officers could no longer control them. The formation accelerated. That was exactly what Adrian wanted. The attackers rushed across ground carefully selected days earlier. Then Adrian gave another signal. Engineers pulled concealed ropes. Wooden coverings collapsed. The earth opened. Men fell screaming into deep pits filled with sharpened stakes. The front ranks stopped abruptly. The rear continued pushing. The army compressed into a dense mass. Adrian looked toward the artillery officers. Canister. The word passed down the battery. 12 cannons changed ammunition. They fired almost together. The result was horrifying. Instead of a single iron ball, each cannon transformed into an enormous shotgun. Metal fragments ripped through packed infantry. Hundreds fell within seconds. The Dravic advance stopped, then it broke. Men turned. Officers screamed at them to maintain formation. Nobody listened. Adrian saw the moment discipline disappeared. Marcus. The old captain grinned. Counterattack? Limited pursuit, infantry only. No one goes beyond the marked ridge. Marcus immediately understood. Adrian was refusing the oldest temptation in warfare, chasing a defeated enemy too far. Greyhaven troops climbed from their trenches. Bayonets had not yet become standard, so Adrian had equipped several assault companies with short spears and sabers. They advanced methodically, not screaming, not scattering, not seeking personal glory. They moved by unit. Rifle teams fired, assault teams followed. Dravic soldiers who attempted to reform were broken apart. Then Greyhaven stopped exactly at the ridge. Volkar could hardly believe it. He had expected pursuit. He had prepared reserve cavalry to trap overconfident enemies. But Adrian's troops refused the bait. Volkar looked across the battlefield. Thousands of his soldiers were dead, wounded, or fleeing. His elite cavalry had been destroyed. His mages had been targeted deliberately. His infantry had been manipulated into a killing zone. And Greyhaven had suffered almost nothing in comparison. A messenger rode toward him. Volkar turned. Our supply convoy was attacked. His blood ran cold. 3 wagons were burned. The northern bridge has collapsed. Scouts report Greyhaven cavalry behind us. Cavalry? Light horse, perhaps 200. Volkar stared toward Adrian's position. Then he understood. The prince had never intended to destroy his army only from the front. For weeks, Adrian's scouts had mapped every road, bridge, stream, village, and forest surrounding Greyhaven. The small mounted force behind Volkar was not designed to defeat him. It existed to sever logistics, food, arrows, healing supplies, replacement weapons, communication, everything an army needed to remain an army. Adrian had once taught his officers that soldiers did not starve because they lacked courage. They starved because someone lost control of the roads. Now Volkar's roads belonged to Greyhaven. That evening, the Dravic army retreated. Adrian did not celebrate. He ordered casualty reports, ammunition counts, weapon inspections, medical assessments, food inventory, horse condition, artillery damage. Only after every number had been recorded did he ask the final question. Enemy casualties? Marcus placed several reports on the table. Current estimate is more than 2,000 killed or seriously wounded. Hundreds more missing. We captured 83 soldiers. And ours? 41 dead, 117 wounded. Silence filled the command tent. The officers looked at one another. Some had served through battles where victory required losing half an army. Today they had shattered a force nearly 3 times their size. Marcus spoke quietly. Your Highness? Adrian looked up. What exactly are you building here? Adrian studied the battlefield map. Something this world has never fought before. The mechanical voice returned inside his mind. It confirmed that Greyhaven's first major defensive victory had dramatically increased his command authority. Territorial stability had improved. Military prestige had increased. A new technology branch was now available. Adrian concentrated. The information entered his mind. Improved metallurgy, percussion ignition systems, advanced artillery production, steam-powered manufacturing, field telegraph principles, military rail transport foundations, and something that immediately caught his attention. A standardized breech-loading rifle prototype. Adrian slowly smiled. His current weapons already terrified kingdoms. Soon his soldiers would reload several times faster. But the victory created another problem. The imperial capital heard about Greyhaven. At first, nobody believed the reports. 8,000 Dravik soldiers defeated by 3,000 recruits? Impossible. Then wounded enemy soldiers began arriving at imperial prisons. Recovered weapons were displayed. Official casualty records were verified. Surviving merchants described hearing endless thunder outside Greyhaven. The story spread. The useless prince had won. Inside the imperial palace, Emperor Cassian read the battlefield report twice, then a third time. His minister of war stood beside him. Your Majesty, Prince Adrian appears to have developed a new type of firearm. Cassian continued reading. Apparently, the weapon may threaten the balance of military power. Apparently, we should order him to surrender the designs. Cassian finally looked up. Would you? The minister hesitated. Your Majesty? If you had created a weapon capable of destroying elite cavalry from hundreds of meters away, would you hand it to brothers who tried to assassinate you? The minister became very still. Cassian knew. Of course he knew. The palace assassinations, the poison, the political factions. The emperor simply allowed his sons to reveal themselves. He had always believed the strongest would survive. But Adrian was changing the nature of the competition itself. Prince Roland reacted less calmly. When the battle report reached him, he smashed a wine glass against the wall. Impossible. His advisor remained silent. Roland grabbed the document. 3,000 peasants? Yes, Your Highness. Against Volkar? Yes. And Volkar retreated. Roland's face darkened. A useless younger brother was harmless. A humiliated drunk was harmless. A prince controlling an industrial province and an unknown weapon was not. Roland walked toward the window. Send someone to Greyhaven. Roland shook his head. No. The first attempt had already failed. If Adrian had become cautious, killing him directly would be difficult. We need his weapon. His advisor smiled faintly. Industrial espionage. Buy a blacksmith. Bribe an officer. Kidnap an engineer. I don't care. Roland turned. Bring me the secret of those rifles. Meanwhile, Greyhaven changed faster than anyone in the Empire expected. Victory brought refugees, farmers, laborers, merchants, former soldiers, craftsmen. People who had heard that Prince Adrian paid wages on time and gave land to veterans began arriving every day. The city's population doubled, then tripled. Adrian organized everything. New districts were planned instead of allowed to grow randomly. Sewage channels were dug. Clean wells were protected. Public granaries were built. Clinics followed sanitation rules that seemed absurd to local physicians until infection rates collapsed. Children of workers received basic schooling. Engineers taught mathematics. Blacksmith apprentices learned standardized measurements. The army became the engine of development. Factories needed workers. Workers needed food. Food required roads, trade. Trade increased taxation. Taxation funded more factories. Greyhaven was no longer merely surviving. It was accelerating. 6 months after Adrian arrived, the first steam engine began operating inside Ironworks No. 1. Workers gathered around the machine as pistons moved. A foreman stared at it as though witnessing magic. No, Adrian replied. No magical crystal. No. Then what powers it? Adrian looked toward the furnace. Heat, pressure, and human understanding. The foreman swallowed. Adrian understood why that frightened him. Magic belonged to gifted individuals. Technology belonged to anyone who could learn. That made technology infinitely more dangerous. Soon, mechanical hammers increased steel production. Boring machines improved cannon barrels. Standardized components allowed damaged rifles to be repaired without requiring the original craftsman. Production climbed. 2,000 rifles became 5,000. 5,000 became 10. Adrian expanded recruitment, but every new soldier required training. He refused to lower standards. Drill, marksmanship, fieldcraft, engineering basics, squad tactics. Every recruit learned why orders existed, instead of simply obeying because a noble shouted. That made his soldiers different. They were not servants carrying weapons. They were professionals. Then Greyhaven scouts captured a stranger near the rifle works. The man carried forged documents. Hidden inside his boot was a coded letter bearing the seal of one of Roland's merchants. Marcus brought the prisoner before Adrian. What should we do with him? Adrian read the letter, then he laughed. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You find espionage amusing? No, Adrian folded the document carefully. I find bad espionage useful, he ordered the spy released. Marcus looked stunned. Released? Give him access to the old workshop. The captain slowly understood. The obsolete rifle designs. Exactly. Adrian's first rifles were already being replaced. They were heavier, slower, less reliable, but still revolutionary compared to Imperial weapons. He wanted Roland to steal them. Marcus grinned. We feed him yesterday's technology, and while he spends a fortune learning how to manufacture it, we move forward. The spy escaped Greyhaven 3 days later, exactly as planned. 2 months afterward, Roland proudly presented his first copied rifle to a group of generals. He believed he had stolen Adrian's greatest advantage. At that exact moment, hundreds of kilometers north, Greyhaven soldiers were receiving their first breech-loading rifles. A trained soldier could now fire several times faster. The new cartridges were easier to carry. Reloading no longer required standing upright. Infantry could fire from prone positions. Adrian watched the demonstration. 6 soldiers fired at targets, fired again, reloaded again. Captain Marcus stared at the smoke drifting over the range. If Roland attacks us with the weapons he stole, Adrian finished the thought, he will discover that he stole a museum exhibit. Before Marcus could respond, a courier entered at full speed. Your Highness, the man's face was white. Adrian turned. What happened? The Dravic kingdom has mobilized again. Marcus frowned. How many? The courier swallowed. Not Dravic alone. He unfolded a sealed intelligence report. Dravic has formed an alliance with the kingdom of Velmora and the Holy Principality of Serath. Adrian's officers went silent. 3 nations, the courier continued. Scouts estimate their combined invasion force at more than 100,000 soldiers. Marcus slowly looked toward Adrian. Greyhaven currently had fewer than 15,000 trained troops. 100,000 enemy soldiers were approaching. And this time they knew what rifles could do. Adrian walked toward the massive campaign map on the wall. He studied the rivers, the mountains, the roads, the enemy capitals. Then his eyes stopped on a narrow valley nearly 60 kilometers beyond the Imperial border. His expression changed. Marcus recognized that expression. It was the same look Adrian had worn before annihilating Volcar. Your Highness? Adrian placed one finger on the valley. We are not defending Greyhaven. The officers stared at him. Adrian's finger moved north, across the border, into enemy territory. If 3 kingdoms believe they can bring 100,000 soldiers to my province, his voice became frighteningly calm. Then I will teach them why modern armies do not wait behind walls. The coalition expected Prince Adrian to hide behind Greyhaven's walls. That assumption became their first mistake. Their second was believing numbers alone could decide the war. Their third was marching exactly where Adrian wanted them to go. The combined army of Dravic, Velmora, and Serath moved south like a continent of steel. Columns of infantry stretched for kilometers. Heavy cavalry rode beneath royal banners. Siege towers rolled along reinforced roads. Priests from Serath accompanied armored paladins blessed with defensive magic. Velmoran battle mages were distributed among the infantry instead of concentrated together, a clear adaptation to what had happened to General Volcar. Dravic engineers constructed mobile shield walls designed to protect troops from rifle fire. They had studied Greyhaven. They had learned. Adrian respected that. It simply meant he needed to teach them something new. Inside Greyhaven's command headquarters, officers crowded around a massive table. Maps covered nearly every surface. Colored markers represented enemy formations, supply depots, bridges, roads, cavalry detachments, and known mage concentrations. Marcus studied the intelligence report. They are moving cautiously. They should, Adrian replied. They are also spreading their formations. They learned from Volcar, and their engineers reinforced the front ranks against musket fire. Adrian nodded. Marcus looked at him. Good. The more they prepare for the army I had 6 months ago, the less prepared they become for the army I have today. He pointed toward the valley north of the border. The terrain narrowed between 2 rocky ridges. A shallow river crossed the center. Only 3 roads could support heavy wagons. The coalition needed those roads because an army of 100,000 consumed an absurd amount of food every day. Adrian had calculated it carefully. Men, horses, draft animals, siege equipment, mage supplies, wagons, cooking fuel, replacement arrows. repair materials. Even without modern standards, the coalition required thousands of tons of supplies to maintain prolonged operations. They could bring 100,000 soldiers, but they could not make those soldiers stop eating. Adrian tapped the map. We destroy the supply network first. An officer frowned. With cavalry raids? No, he moved 3 markers, with artillery. Marcus leaned closer. The positions were not defensive. They were deep inside enemy territory. Mobile guns? Adrian nodded. The latest Greyhaven artillery pieces were lighter than the first generation. Improved metallurgy reduced barrel weight. Standardized carriages allowed damaged wheels to be replaced quickly. Horse teams could move batteries much faster. More importantly, Adrian had organized dedicated reconnaissance units whose only job was locating enemy roads and supply traffic. Greyhaven did not need to defeat the coalition army immediately. It needed to make that army impossible to feed. 3 nights later, the operation began. Small Greyhaven detachments crossed the border. They carried no banners, no drums, no ceremonial armor. They moved through forests guided by local hunters who had been paid in silver and grain. Before dawn, the first artillery battery reached a hillside overlooking the northern supply road. Below, hundreds of wagons crawled toward the coalition army. Flour, medical herbs, arrows, horse feed, replacement weapons. Everything 100,000 soldiers needed. The Greyhaven commander raised his hand. Range confirmed. The gunners adjusted elevation. Fire. The first shell struck near the center of the convoy. The explosion terrified the horses. Wagons overturned. Drivers scattered. A second shell hit a cart filled with lamp oil. Flames erupted. Then the entire battery fired. Within minutes, the road became chaos. Greyhaven cavalry appeared from the tree line. They did not attack the escorts directly. They shot the draft animals, burned intact wagons, destroyed bridge supports, then vanished. By the time coalition reinforcements arrived, the attackers were gone. The same thing happened farther east, then west, then north. 3 convoys were destroyed in 2 days. 7 bridges were damaged. 2 grain depots burned. A major horse feed warehouse exploded after Greyhaven infiltrators ignited stored oil. The coalition commanders became furious. They sent cavalry to chase the raiders. Adrian had expected that too. Every cavalry detachment sent away from the main army was 1 less available for battle. Every escort added to a wagon train was 1 less soldier at the front. Every delay consumed food. Every response created another weakness. At the coalition headquarters, King Merrick of Dravik slammed his fist onto a table. We have 100,000 men. Why are we being harassed by farmers with guns? Velmora's general answered coldly. Because they are not farmers anymore. A Sarathi archbishop narrowed his eyes. This prince relies too heavily on machines. General Halbrecht of Velmora looked toward him. And yet those machines are burning our supplies. The archbishop's expression hardened. Then we destroy the machines. The coalition changed tactics. Mage escorts were assigned to supply convoys. Paladins protected bridges. Scouts moved ahead of every column. Adrian received the report that evening. Marcus waited for his response. Adrian simply moved another marker on the map. They have concentrated protection around the roads. Yes, so now we stop attacking the roads. Marcus smiled. What do we attack? Adrian pointed toward the river. The water. The coalition relied heavily on river transport, because wagons alone could not support the scale of the invasion. Barges carried grain and equipment downstream. A single barge could transport more supplies than dozens of carts, which meant a handful of river choke points had suddenly become more valuable than entire fortresses. Greyhaven engineers moved at night. They placed charges beneath a stone bridge near the town of Delaran. The technology was still crude. The explosives were unreliable. But Adrian's engineers had learned quickly. At sunrise, a coalition convoy approached. 6 supply barges floated beneath the bridge. The engineers triggered the charges. The center span collapsed. Stone crashed into the river. 1 barge split apart. Another overturned. 2 became trapped against the rubble. The river route was blocked. Hundreds of tons of supplies stopped moving. The coalition army had not yet fought a major battle, and already hunger began entering the ranks. Soldiers received reduced rations. Horses lost weight. Officers argued over distribution. Then rain arrived. The roads became mud. Adrian had hoped for that. His logistics officers had prepared Greyhaven's roads with drainage and stone reinforcement months earlier. The coalition had not. Wagons sank. Horses collapsed from exhaustion. Siege equipment moved at half speed. The invasion slowed. That was when Adrian advanced. Greyhaven's army crossed the border in 4 separate columns. Nearly 18,000 soldiers now followed him. still hopelessly outnumbered. But every unit had standardized command structures. Every battalion carried reserve ammunition. Every artillery battery had dedicated transport. Every company had medics. Signal teams laid early field communication lines between important positions. The system had also helped Adrian refine a primitive telegraph network, using local copper production. It was limited, fragile, difficult to deploy, but where it worked, orders moved faster than horses. That changed everything. A coalition commander might need hours to learn that his left flank had been attacked. Adrian could receive the same information in minutes. Information became a weapon. The first major engagement occurred near Halden Ridge. 20,000 Velmoran troops occupied the high ground. Their commander believed Adrian would either attack uphill or retreat. He was wrong about both. Greyhaven artillery opened fire before sunrise. Not against the infantry, against the command tents. Adrian's scouts had spent days identifying where officers gathered. The first barrage destroyed the primary headquarters. The second targeted messenger stations. The third hit the horse lines. The Velmoran army did not collapse, but it became confused. Orders contradicted one another. Units moved without coordination. Then Greyhaven infantry attacked only the eastern side. The Velmorans shifted reserves east. Adrian waited. More reserves moved. Then Greyhaven troops withdrew. The Velmoran commander assumed the attack had failed. Minutes later, artillery struck the western slope. Greyhaven's main force advanced there instead. Breech-loading rifles opened fire. The difference was immediate. The coalition had prepared shield walls against slow volleys. They had not prepared for soldiers who could reload while kneeling. Greyhaven infantry fired, reloaded, fired again and again. The Velmoran front ranks could not close the distance. Battle mages began casting. Greyhaven marksmen targeted them. Paladins advanced with magical barriers. Adrian ordered artillery to concentrate on the ground around them. The barriers stopped fragments from striking directly. They did not stop the earth beneath their feet from exploding. Paladins were knocked down. Formation shattered. Riflemen fired into the gaps. Marcus watched through his telescope. They adapted to bullets. Adrian nodded. So we adapted to their adaptation. By afternoon, Halden Ridge belonged to Greyhaven. Adrian did not pursue deeply. Again, he captured ammunition, food, horses, prisoners. Most importantly, he captured documents. The Velmoran commander had kept copies of coalition supply schedules. Adrian spent the night studying them. At dawn, he called Marcus. We know where their main reserve depot is. Marcus looked at the map. Stonehaven. Yes. Stonehaven was a fortified town holding enough grain to sustain much of the coalition army for weeks. It was protected by nearly 6,000 soldiers. Marcus frowned. A siege could take months. We are not sieging it. Adrian pointed to the railway sketches on another table. Greyhaven had begun laying primitive industrial rail lines inside the province months earlier. They were still short, still incomplete, but enough had been built near the border to move artillery and supplies rapidly along several critical routes. Marcus understood. We move faster than they expect, exactly. Greyhaven forces marched at night. Artillery traveled along reinforced roads and rail sections where available. Infantry rotated between marching and transport wagons. Adrian pushed the army hard but refused pointless exhaustion. He had learned in his previous life that speed came from organization, not simply forcing men to walk until they collapsed. 3 days later, Greyhaven reached Stonehaven before the coalition believed it was possible. The defenders had barely prepared. Adrian surrounded only 3 sides. Marcus noticed immediately. You left the northern road open. For retreat, exactly. A trapped enemy fought desperately. An enemy given an escape route often chose survival. Artillery bombarded the southern defenses. Riflemen approached under cover. Engineers destroyed barricades. After 6 hours, the defenders began withdrawing north. Adrian let them go. Greyhaven entered Stonehaven almost intact. The warehouses were enormous. Grain, meat, medical supplies, horse feed, iron, salt, enough to support tens of thousands. Marcus stared at the captured stores. We just stole their stomach. Adrian smiled. Now they get hungry. The coalition army finally realized the scale of the disaster. 100,000 soldiers had entered the campaign. Fewer than 80,000 remained combat effective after sickness, desertion, casualties, and detachments assigned to supply protection. Their main depot was gone. Several roads were unusable. Their river route was disrupted. And Greyhaven controlled the initiative. King Merrick demanded immediate decisive battle. The other commanders agreed for different reasons. Some wanted revenge. Some feared political humiliation. Some simply understood that retreating after mobilizing 3 nations would destroy their reputations. They gathered nearly 70,000 troops near the plains of Arkan. Wide open ground, few forests. Ideal for cavalry. Ideal for mass formations. They believed it would neutralize Adrian's ambush tactics. Adrian accepted the battle. Marcus questioned him. Open terrain favors their numbers. Only if we fight the battle they imagine. On the morning of Arkan, the coalition army formed a line nearly 5 kilometers wide. Banners covered the horizon. Cavalry gathered on both wings. Paladins held the center. Mages stood behind layered infantry. Greyhaven's army looked tiny by comparison. 20,000 troops, 52 artillery pieces. Several thousand breech-loading rifles, engineers, cavalry, signal detachments, and something hidden beneath canvas behind the main line. Adrian stood on a command hill. The system voice echoed inside his mind. His accumulated authority from industrial growth, territorial expansion, and battlefield victories had finally unlocked another milestone. A new weapons package had become available. Adrian had spent nearly every reserve point on it. Not because it was elegant, because it would change the battlefield. Marcus approached. The enemy is advancing. Adrian lifted his telescope. The coalition infantry moved forward. Drums thundered. Priests shouted blessings. Cavalry spread along the flanks. Adrian lowered the telescope. Uncover them. Soldiers pulled away the canvas sheets. Marcus had already seen the prototypes. He still felt uneasy every time. Mounted on heavy wheeled frames were strange weapons with rotating barrels. Crude, heavy, mechanically temperamental, but capable of sustained fire unlike anything in this world. Adrian had not created them in large numbers. Production was too difficult. Ammunition consumption was enormous. Only 12 existed. 12 were enough. The coalition reached effective range. Adrian gave the order. The machines began firing. A continuous mechanical roar swallowed the battlefield. The front ranks of the coalition army collapsed. Men behind them kept advancing. Then they collapsed too, officers screamed. Paladins raised shields. Bullets hammered against barriers until mana cracked under sustained pressure. Cavalry attempted a flank charge. Hidden field guns opened fire. Rifle companies pivoted. The horses entered prepared lanes covered by overlapping fire. The charge dissolved. For the first time, the coalition army stopped moving forward. Then it began moving backward. Adrian watched carefully. Not yet, he waited. The coalition commanders forced their troops forward again. Reserve formations advanced, exactly as he expected. Adrian raised his hand. Signal flags changed. Greyhaven artillery shifted target. Instead of firing at the front line, shells flew farther, into the reserve troops, into command posts, into supply wagons, into messenger routes. The enemy had believed the battle was about killing soldiers. Adrian was attacking the army as a system: communication, mobility, logistics, morale. Break enough parts and the whole structure failed. By midday, the coalition center began collapsing. King Merrick personally rode forward to rally his troops. A Greyhaven marksman saw the royal banner. One shot cracked across the battlefield. Merrick's horse fell. The king survived, but the rumor spread instantly that he had been killed. Panic became contagious. The Dravik left wing withdrew. Velmoran troops thought they were being abandoned. They began retreating too. Sarathi paladins refused to move. For several minutes they stood alone in the center. Then Greyhaven artillery surrounded them with explosions. Adrian gave the final order. Advance. 20,000 Greyhaven soldiers moved forward. Not as a mob. As a machine, rifle companies fired while moving by alternating lines. Artillery advanced behind them. Engineers cleared obstacles. Cavalry waited for the exact moment the enemy lost cohesion. Then Marcus led the charge. Greyhaven cavalry struck retreating formations from the side. The coalition army broke. 70,000 soldiers became thousands of frightened groups running north. Adrian did not order a massacre. He ordered surrender corridors established. Weapons were collected. Prisoners received food. Wounded enemies were treated. Marcus returned after sunset, covered in mud and blood. The field is ours. Adrian looked across Arkan. Thousands of campfires glowed in the darkness. Captured banners lay piled beside the command tent. 3 kingdoms had invaded Greyhaven. Their united army had been destroyed. The system voice echoed again. Command authority surged. Political influence increased dramatically. A major military milestone had been achieved. New technology branches were available. Internal combustion fundamentals, advanced communications, machine tooling, modern explosives, improved early armored vehicle concepts. Adrian closed his eyes. He had wanted enough power to survive. Now he had enough power to reshape nations. A courier entered the tent. Your Highness, message from the imperial capital. Adrian opened the letter. It bore Emperor Cassian's seal. Marcus watched his face. What does His Majesty want? Adrian read the final line twice. Then he handed the letter over. Marcus's expression hardened. Prince Roland had accused Adrian of treason. He claimed Greyhaven had become an illegal private army. He claimed Adrian intended to rebel. He claimed the prince had concealed forbidden weapons from the crown, and Roland had convinced several powerful noble houses to support an imperial decree. Adrian was ordered to return to the capital immediately. His army was to remain behind. His weapons were to be surrendered to the Ministry of War. Marcus stared at the paper. This is a trap. Obviously, if you go, Roland kills you, probably. If you refuse, they call you a traitor. Definitely. Marcus placed one hand on the table. So what do we do? Adrian looked south, toward the Empire. Toward the capital where his brothers had laughed at him. Toward the palace, where someone had once discussed how best to dispose of his corpse. For months, Adrian had prepared for foreign invasion. Now the most dangerous battlefield was finally opening. Home. He folded the Emperor's letter. Then he smiled. We obey. Marcus looked stunned. Your Highness? Adrian walked toward the map of the Ardinian Empire. Roland wants me inside the capital without my army. He placed one finger directly over the imperial city. So I will go. His finger did not move. But he made one mistake. Marcus waited. Adrian's eyes became cold. He thinks Greyhaven's army is the only weapon I built. Adrian entered the imperial capital with only 12 men. That was exactly what Prince Roland wanted everyone to see. No artillery, no rifle battalions, no Greyhaven veterans. No army marching beneath black military banners. Only 12 guards dressed in plain dark uniforms escorting a prince who appeared to be voluntarily walking into his own execution. Citizens crowded the avenues. Months earlier, those same streets had mocked Adrian when his engagement collapsed. Now nobody laughed. Stories from the Northern War had reached every tavern and marketplace. They spoke of impossible weapons, cannons that shattered cavalry from beyond bow range, rifles that allowed common soldiers to kill knights, machines that fired without stopping, factories where iron moved under the power of steam instead of magic. And above all, they spoke of the useless prince who had destroyed the armies of 3 kingdoms. Some believed the stories were exaggerated. Others believed Adrian had discovered forbidden sorcery. The nobles believed something more dangerous. They believed he had become powerful without them. That was unforgivable. Adrian's carriage stopped before the imperial palace. Captain Marcus was not with him. Roland had insisted that no Greyhaven commander be allowed into the capital. Adrian had agreed too easily. That should have frightened Roland. It did not. The 4th prince waited inside the Hall of Crowns, surrounded by ministers, generals, noble patriarchs, and royal guards. Emperor Cassian sat on the throne. Unlike before, the old emperor looked tired, not physically weak, politically surrounded. Adrian entered. Every eye followed him. Roland stepped forward. Prince Adrian Valcrest, you stand accused of withholding military technology from the crown, illegally expanding provincial forces, conducting unauthorized warfare beyond imperial borders, and establishing institutions loyal to yourself rather than the empire. Adrian looked around. No laughter now. Interesting. Roland continued. You were ordered to surrender your weapons to the Ministry of War, I remember. No. Roland frowned. Adrian calmly continued. I delayed transfer pending inspection. That is refusal. Then charge half the imperial bureaucracy with treason. They delay everything. A few nobles lowered their faces to hide smiles. Roland's jaw tightened. This is not a joke, I agree. Adrian looked directly at him. Which is why I find it strange that the man accusing me of endangering the empire is the same man who attempted to have me poisoned. The hall exploded into whispers. Roland's face went still. You are making a serious accusation. So are you? Do you have proof? Adrian smiled. That was the moment Roland understood. Too late. Adrian raised one hand. One of his 12 guards stepped forward carrying a small leather case. Inside were letters, payment records, merchant contracts, names of intermediaries, instructions for bribing Greyhaven craftsmen, reports from infiltrators, and the confession of the physician who had entered Adrian's bedroom months ago. Roland stared at the documents. For the first time, fear entered his eyes. Adrian had not simply survived the assassination attempt. He had preserved it, cataloged it, connected it to Roland's espionage network, turned every move against him into evidence. The Emperor looked toward the Minister of Justice. Authenticate them. Roland immediately stepped forward. Father, this is fabricated. Cassian's eyes hardened. Then authentication will prove that. The minister began examining seals. Roland watched him, then watched Adrian, then watched the guards stationed around the hall. Adrian recognized the calculation happening behind his brother's eyes. If politics failed, force remained. Roland had always trusted force. The problem was that he understood force only in its most primitive form. Men with swords, knights with armor. Orders shouted loudly. Adrian understood networks. Roland suddenly pointed toward him. Arrest him! Several royal guards hesitated. That hesitation told Adrian everything. Roland had expected immediate obedience. Instead, only part of the hall moved. Perhaps 40 guards drew swords. Others remained still. The emperor rose. But Roland had crossed the line. The empire cannot allow Greyhaven to exist as a state within a state. Adrian has built weapons capable of killing noble knights from a distance. He has trained peasants to challenge hereditary warriors. He controls factories, mines, armies, and foreign territory. His voice grew louder. Do none of you understand what happens if he becomes king? The silence was telling. Roland turned toward the nobles. Your castles become irrelevant. Toward the knights, your bloodlines become irrelevant. Toward the mage families, your power becomes irrelevant. Adrian listened. Roland was finally saying what the ruling class truly feared. Not invasion. Not treason. Obsolescence. Adrian stepped forward. That is your argument? Roland glared at him. You would destroy the order that created this empire. No. Adrian's voice remained calm. I would destroy the incompetence hiding behind it. Roland drew his sword. The hall erupted. His loyal guards charged. Adrian's 12 men moved instantly. Roland laughed. 12 soldiers? Adrian did not answer. His guards reached beneath their coats. Short, repeating firearms appeared in their hands. The first volley shattered the charge. Royal guards who expected sword combat suddenly faced concentrated gunfire at close range. Armor failed. Formation failed. Confidence failed. Within seconds, Roland's men scattered behind pillars. The rest of the palace guard finally reacted. But not against Adrian. Their commander raised his sword. Protect the emperor. Roland stared in disbelief. You answer to me. The commander looked at him. I answer to the throne. That distinction destroyed Roland faster than any bullet. He ran. Adrian did not chase him. Of course not. He had already planned where Roland would go. The fourth prince escaped through the western palace gate with several loyal knights. Horses waited. Within minutes, he was riding toward the military district. Roland still commanded influence over the Imperial Lion Guard. Nearly 6,000 elite soldiers were stationed inside the capital. If he could rally them, seize the palace, and declare Adrian a rebel, he might still win. He reached the Lion Guard barracks. The gates were closed. Roland shouted. Open, nothing happened. Open the gates. The gates slowly parted. Roland rode inside, then stopped. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, not facing outward. Facing him, their commander stepped forward. Roland smiled with relief. Generalize everyone. Adrian has attempted a coup. Darius said nothing. Roland frowned. Did you hear me? I then moved. Darius removed something from inside his coat. A document. Roland recognized the imperial seal. By direct order of Emperor Cassian, effective this morning, command of the Imperial Lion Guard has been transferred. Roland froze. Transferred to whom? Darius looked past him. Roland slowly turned. A man walked through the gate, gray hair. A scarred face, Captain Marcus. Except he was no longer wearing a captain's insignia. Adrian had promoted him. To me, Marcus said. Roland's face drained of color. You were forbidden from entering the capital. Marcus smiled. I entered yesterday. Roland finally understood what Adrian meant when he said Greyhaven's army was not his only weapon. Adrian had spent months building something else. Veteran networks. Merchant networks. Intelligence contacts. Engineers, doctors. Former officers abandoned by the nobility. Families of soldiers who had been denied pensions. Junior commanders disgusted by corruption. Every successful reform in Greyhaven had created witnesses. Every victory had created credibility. Every captured enemy had created diplomatic leverage. Every paid wage had created loyalty. Adrian had not marched an army into the capital. He had allowed the capital to slowly become sympathetic to Greyhaven. Roland reached for his sword. Marcus raised a pistol. Do not. Roland laughed bitterly. You think Adrian will spare you when he becomes emperor? Marcus did not blink. He gave land to my soldiers when the empire gave them graves. Roland drew. Marcus fired. The bullet struck Roland's shoulder. He fell from the saddle. Lion guards surrounded him. By sunset, the fourth prince was imprisoned beneath the palace. But Adrian knew Roland was not the real problem. He was simply the most impatient symptom. The empire itself was rotting. That night, Emperor Cassian summoned Adrian privately. No ministers, no guards, only father and son. Cassian stood before a window overlooking the capital. You planned today, most of it. How long since I learned Roland ordered my death? Cassian nodded. You could have killed him months ago. Yes, why not? Because then he becomes a victim. The emperor turned, Adrian continued. Dead enemies can be turned into martyrs. Exposed enemies become warnings. Cassian studied him. You are frightening, I have heard that recently. The old emperor almost smiled. Then his expression became serious. Do you want the throne? Adrian did not answer immediately. That surprised Cassian. Every other prince would have lied or declared loyalty. Adrian simply considered the question. I want an empire capable of surviving what comes next. Cassian's eyes narrowed. What comes next? Adrian walked toward the map of the continent. Armenia occupied only part of it. Beyond the western mountains lay powerful kingdoms. To the east stood merchant republics with enormous fleets. Far south were desert empires rich in resources. And across the northern sea, according to Greyhaven intelligence, several nations were beginning to experiment with primitive firearms of their own. Adrian touched the map, industrialization. Cassian frowned. Adrian explained, Greyhaven's methods would spread. Even if every workshop were destroyed tomorrow, enough blacksmiths had seen standardized manufacturing. Enough soldiers had seen rifle formations. Enough merchants had seen steam engines. Enough spies had stolen pieces of knowledge. The old world was ending. Not because Adrian wanted it to. Because once people learned that machines could compete with magic and hereditary warriors, nobody could force them to forget. Within years, Adrian said, every serious kingdom will seek firearms. Then Greyhaven loses its advantage. If Greyhaven remains unchanged, Cassian understood. You intend to keep advancing. How far? Adrian looked at him. As far as necessary. The emperor returned to his chair. For several moments, he looked older than ever. I spent my life protecting this throne. Adrian remained silent. I fought my brothers for it. I executed rebels for it. I conquered provinces for it. I believe the empire survived because the throne remained strong. Cassian looked toward the city. Perhaps I confused the throne with the empire. Adrian said nothing. The old man did not need comfort. He needed truth. Cassian finally spoke. The succession council will convene in 1 month. Adrian's expression remained unchanged. You intend to name an heir? Yes. Cassian gave a tired laugh, perhaps. That answer revealed the real danger. Adrian still had brothers. The first prince controlled wealthy southern nobles. The second had powerful ties to the church. The third prince commanded cavalry provinces. The fifth had married into a maritime kingdom. The sixth was young, charming, and loved by the capital. Roland's fall had not ended the succession war. It had removed the man loud enough to distract everyone from the others. Adrian returned to his residence after midnight. A Greyhaven intelligence officer waited inside. Report. Your Highness, 3 encrypted messages left the capital after Roland's arrest. Destinations? 1 went south. The first prince. The 5th prince. And the 3rd? The officer hesitated. To the Holy Principality of Sareth. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Sareth had just participated in the failed northern invasion. Why would someone inside the imperial capital contact them now? The officer placed another document on the table. We also intercepted information from our northern agents. Adrian opened it. His expression changed. Sareth was mobilizing again, but not alone. This time the church had issued a proclamation. Prince Adrian had been declared an enemy of divine order. His machines were described as blasphemous. His weapons were said to place destructive power into hands unworthy of possessing it. Priests were calling for a holy campaign. Knights from several nations were gathering. Mercenaries were being hired. Mage families terrified by Greyhaven's rise had begun donating money. Foreign nobles were joining voluntarily. The report estimated that the next coalition could be larger than the first. Much larger, the intelligence officer spoke quietly. They are calling it a crusade. Adrian placed the report down. Outside his window, the imperial capital slept peacefully. Most citizens believed the Northern War was finished. They had no idea that an even greater conflict was already forming. A conflict no longer about borders. This one was about the future itself. The mechanical voice returned inside Adrian's mind. His influence over the imperial capital had crossed another threshold. Political authority, industrial authority, and military authority had combined. A strategic national development tier was now available. Adrian focused. The new possibilities appeared within his understanding. Advanced railways, mass electrification foundations, long-range telegraph networks. modern steel production, improved explosives, early motor vehicles, heavy artillery, and one branch that immediately dominated his attention: armored warfare, primitive tracked vehicles protected by steel, armed with cannons, able to cross terrain horses could not. Adrian stared at the technological pathway, then slowly looked north. Sirith wanted a holy war. Nobles wanted to preserve the age of knights. Mage families wanted ordinary people pushed back beneath them. Fine. Adrian had spent his first war proving that rifles could destroy cavalry. The next war would prove something even more brutal. The age of knights was not merely losing, it was already dead. And soon steel monsters would roll over its corpse. The crusade began with bells. Across Sereth, cathedral towers rang from dawn until midnight. Priests stood before enormous crowds and declared that the world itself had been threatened by Prince Adrian Valcrest. They called rifles weapons of cowardice. They called factories temples of greed. They called steam engines an insult to divine creation. They called common soldiers carrying firearms an abomination against the natural order. But beneath the holy speeches was a simpler fear. For centuries, power had belonged to those born close to it. A knight required expensive armor, horses, years of training, and noble sponsorship. A battle mage required bloodline talent, private tutors, magical crystals, and access to secret academies. A paladin required church recognition. A common farmer could spend his entire life beneath such people without ever possessing the strength to challenge them. Adrian had changed that equation. Give a farmer discipline, give him education, give him a rifle. Suddenly lineage mattered less. Give 10,000 farmers the same training, reliable logistics, artillery support, and officers promoted by competence instead of ancestry. And the old ruling order faced something far more terrifying than rebellion: replacement. That was why knights from half the continent answered Sereth's call. That was why mage families sent money. That was why frightened aristocrats donated horses and supplies. And that was why several of Adrian's own brothers began quietly speaking with the Crusaders. The coming war was not merely foreign. It was political, religious, economic, civilizational. Adrian understood that before most of his enemies understood it themselves, so he refused to begin by mobilizing more soldiers. Instead, he began with coal. Inside Greyhaven, production targets doubled. New mines opened. Existing shafts were reinforced. Rail lines expanded between industrial districts, mines, arsenals, and military depots. Steam locomotives were still primitive, loud, dangerous, and painfully expensive to construct. But Adrian pushed development anyway. A kingdom could move an army with wagons. An industrial state could move armies with schedules. That difference would eventually decide continents. Marcus returned from inspecting the northern defenses carrying a thick folder of reports. Sereth's coalition continues growing. Adrian remained focused on a railway map. Numbers? Confirmed forces are already above 120,000. Projected? Possibly 180,000. Adrian marked another line across the map. Marcus frowned. You do realize I just told you almost 200,000 soldiers may be marching toward us. I heard you. And you are drawing railways. Marcus sighed. Adrian finally looked up. If they bring 180,000 men, they require 180,000 men's worth of food. I know, horses. Yes, siege equipment. Marcus nodded. Adrian tapped the railway plans. Then why should I fear their numbers more than they should? Marcus stared at him, then smiled. Because every extra soldier is another mouth. Now you understand. The coalition believed mass was strength. Adrian saw mass as dependency. An army became more powerful as it grew only if its logistical system grew with it. Otherwise, size became a disease. He intended to let the crusade become obese. Meanwhile, the succession crisis inside Ardinia accelerated. Emperor Cassian's health suddenly deteriorated. Officially, it was fever. Adrian suspected poison. The timing was too convenient. The succession council was less than 3 weeks away. Every prince stood to gain from Cassian's death before a formal heir was named. Adrian personally examined the emperor's treatment records. Different medicines had been prescribed by 3 physicians. One preparation contained traces of a rare herb that increased bleeding. Another weakened the heart when combined with fever medication. Individually, none would necessarily kill. Together, they could. Adrian ordered the imperial physicians detained. The court erupted. The second prince, Lucien, accused him of overstepping authority. Lucien was everything Adrian was not. A religious, beloved by priests. Educated in theology and imperial law. His supporters controlled temples, charities, courts, and several influential noble houses. He confronted Adrian before the council. You are turning the palace into Greyhaven. Adrian looked at him. No. If this were Greyhaven, the medical records would already be standardized enough that poisoning the emperor through contradictory prescriptions would have been considerably harder. Lucian's expression tightened. You accuse everyone. I investigate everyone. You see conspiracies because you think like a soldier, and you see divine purpose whenever politics becomes inconvenient. Several ministers looked away. Lucien stepped closer. You cannot shoot every problem. Adrian smiled faintly. Correct, then his eyes sharpened. That is why I learned administration. The investigation uncovered payments. One physician had accepted gold from a merchant associated with the church estate. That merchant worked indirectly for a noble family supporting Lucien. It was not proof that the second prince ordered the poisoning. Adrian refused to pretend otherwise. But it was enough to weaken Lucien's position. Then the emperor woke. Cassian demanded to speak privately with Adrian. The old man looked terrible. His hands trembled. His breathing had become shallow. But his mind remained sharp. Did Lucien poison me? I cannot prove it. Cassian looked surprised. You could accuse him and probably win. Probably. Yet you will not. Why? Adrian sat beside the bed. Because if I start building a government where accusation becomes evidence, eventually someone better at accusations will inherit it. Cassian studied him for a long time. You really are not like your brothers. No, you are worse. Adrian almost laughed. Cassian smiled weakly. Worse for anyone who enjoys the old way. Then he reached beneath his blanket. A sealed document appeared. Adrian recognized the imperial succession seal. Cassian held it out. I intended to announce this before the council. Adrian did not take it. Then announce it. I may not live that long. Then survive. Cassian laughed, then coughed violently. Blood touched the cloth near his mouth. Adrian's expression hardened. Cassian pushed the document toward him. Take it. Adrian accepted the sealed order. Do you want me to read it? No. That surprised him. Cassian closed his eyes. I want everyone else to hear it from me. Adrian understood. A succession order discovered after the emperor died could be called forged. A living emperor speaking publicly was harder to challenge. Then I will keep you alive. Cassian opened one eye. You say that as if refusing death were an administrative order. For the moment it is. Adrian replaced the emperor's medical staff. Greyhaven physicians took over. They washed hands obsessively, boiled instruments, recorded every dose, restricted visitors, measured temperature and pulse regularly. Court doctors called the procedures ridiculous. Then Cassian began improving. That improvement frightened Adrian more than the illness. Whoever wanted the emperor dead now knew the first attempt had failed. A second would come. At the same time, the crusade crossed Sereth's western frontier. It was larger than expected, nearly 200,000 troops. But the army was divided politically. Sarathi paladins followed church commanders. Dravic remnants demanded revenge. Velmoran generals wanted Adrian's industrial territory. Foreign knights wanted glory. Mercenaries wanted money. Mage houses wanted Greyhaven's research destroyed. They shared an enemy. They did not share a command structure. Adrian immediately identified the weakness. He could not defeat 200,000 soldiers by treating them as one army. So he would make sure they never became one. Greyhaven intelligence began circulating forged messages. Dravic commanders received documents suggesting Sereth planned to sacrifice them in the first assault. Sarathi officers intercepted fake letters implying Velmora intended to seize captured Greyhaven factories. Mercenaries learned that church treasurers might delay payment. Velmoran nobles received rumors that Dravic had negotiated secret surrender terms. Most of the documents were never fully believed. They did not need to be. Trust did not have to be destroyed. It only had to become expensive. Then Adrian sent another weapon into enemy territory. Pamphlets. Millions of aristocrats feared rifle. Very few understood printing presses. Greyhaven presses produced simple messages addressed directly to coalition soldiers. Some promised safe treatment for deserters. Some listed the casualty numbers from the previous war. Some explained exactly how badly supply conditions would deteriorate. Others simply asked soldiers one question. Why die to protect a noble's right to keep you powerless? The coalition priests called the pamphlets heresy. They ordered soldiers to burn them. That only made men read them first. Then came Adrian's first armored prototype. The machine emerged from Workshop 9 beneath a cloud of smoke. Marcus stared at it. So this is your steel monster. Adrian looked almost disappointed. Not yet, the vehicle was ugly. A crude track chassis. Thick steel plates. A small cannon mounted inside a rotating structure that worked only when it felt cooperative. The engine overheated. The transmission failed constantly. The crew compartment became unbearable after prolonged operation. Its maximum speed would not impress a healthy horse. Marcus walked around it. It looks terrible. It is terrible. You intend to use it in war eventually. Marcus touched the armor. And if the enemy attacks it, that is the useful part. Adrian understood prototype development better than his officers. The first version did not need to be perfect. It needed to reveal which failures mattered. Greyhaven built more, broke them, redesigned components, changed tracks, improved ventilation, strengthened gears, refined armor angles. The system gave Adrian knowledge. It did not eliminate engineering reality. A blueprint was not an industry. That distinction kept him cautious. The crusade continued advancing. Adrian deliberately abandoned several minor border posts. Enemy commanders celebrated. They announced that Greyhaven had become frightened. Church messengers described the retreat as divine judgment. Adrian watched from a distant headquarters. He wanted them confident. Confident armies moved faster. Faster armies stretched supply lines. The crusade occupied the town of Belisar. Then another, then another. Every town looked abandoned. Warehouses were empty. Bridges had been weakened. Wells were usable, but food stores had already been removed. Livestock had been evacuated. The invaders gained territory. They gained nothing to eat. After 2 weeks, commanders began arguing. After 3, horse fodder became scarce. After 4, disease appeared. Then Greyhaven struck, not the army, the depots. Long-range artillery hit a supply concentration outside Belisar. Saboteurs destroyed a railway bridge the coalition had been attempting to repair. Partisan groups armed by Greyhaven attacked messenger posts. Cavalry raiders seized livestock. Adrian used mobility to keep the enemy uncertain. Whenever they concentrated, he disappeared. Whenever they dispersed, he attacked. Whenever they advanced, he retreated. Whenever they rested, artillery found them. The crusade became exhausted without receiving the glorious battle its commanders had promised. That was when Sereth made its desperate move. The church unveiled 7 sacred guardians. These were not ordinary paladins. Each wore enchanted armor said to withstand dragonfire. Each possessed mana reinforcement strong enough to break stone walls. One guardian had supposedly killed an entire rebel battalion alone. The coalition finally had heroes powerful enough to force battle. The Sarathi High Commander sent Adrian a challenge. 7 guardians against 7 champions. If Greyhaven refused, the church would declare him a coward before the continent. Marcus read the letter and laughed. They still think you care. Adrian took the challenge seriously, not because he intended to accept the duel, because propaganda mattered. If he ignored it completely, Sarath would control the story, so Adrian answered. On the appointed morning, thousands gathered across a wide field. The 7 sacred guardians rode forward in brilliant silver armor. Priests raised banners. Enemy soldiers cheered. Greyhaven's line remained silent. The Sarathi herald shouted, "Prince Adrian Valcrest, present your 7 champions." Adrian stepped onto the forward observation platform. He carried no sword, no armor, only a field coat. The herald laughed. "Will you fight personally?" Adrian raised one hand. Behind him, artillery crews uncovered 7 guns. The laughter disappeared. The herald's face twisted. "This is a duel." Adrian's voice carried across the field through a mechanical speaking horn. "No." He looked at the 7 legendary warriors. "This is a demonstration." The sacred guardians charged. Their magical armor began glowing. One raised a barrier, another accelerated with supernatural speed. The coalition army roared. Adrian lowered his hand. 7 artillery pieces fired. The earth disappeared beneath explosions. Smoke swallowed the guardians. For several seconds, nobody could see anything. Then one silver figure emerged, armor broken, shield missing. Still alive, enemy soldiers began cheering. Adrian gave another signal. A heavy, repeating gun opened fire. The guardian's magical protection flickered. He continued advancing. Bullets hammered his armor. One step, another. Another. Then the light around him vanished. The night collapsed. Silence consumed the field. Adrian looked across the enemy army. For centuries, you were taught that one exceptional warrior could decide a battle. His voice echoed over the plain. That age is over. Behind him, engines started. The ground trembled. 6 armored vehicles rolled forward from behind the ridge, ugly. Slow, covered in steel, smoke pouring from their exhausts. Coalition horses panicked. Priests stopped chanting. Knights stared at machines they had no language to describe. Adrian watched the enemy line. Then the system voice sounded inside his mind once more. The armored warfare branch had entered live combat status. A new threshold of military modernization had been recognized. Further developments were becoming available. Mobile artillery, improved engines, armored transports, advanced machine guns. And beyond them, faint but unmistakable, was the beginning of something even greater. Adrian smiled. The crusade had marched south to preserve the Age of Knights. Instead, it had arrived just in time to witness its funeral. The first armored vehicle crossed the field at less than walking speed. It did not need to move quickly. It only needed to keep moving. Arrows struck the frontal plate and shattered. Crossbow bolts bounced away. A Sarathi mage launched a spear of compressed flame. The spell exploded against the steel hull, wrapping the machine in orange fire. Coalition soldiers cheered. Then the vehicle emerged through the flames, blackened. Smoking still advancing, the cheers died. Inside the cramped fighting compartment, the crew could barely hear one another over the engine. The driver fought the steering levers. The gunner rotated the turret by hand. The commander stared through a narrow vision slit and shouted a correction. The cannon fired. A coalition barricade vanished. Adrian watched through his telescope. The machine was not invincible. He knew that better than anyone. The armor was inconsistent. The engine remained dangerously unreliable. A direct magical strike to the tracks could immobilize it. Heavy artillery would tear it apart. Even deep mud could defeat it. But the enemy did not know that. And fear rarely waited for technical analysis. To the Crusaders, the machines looked immortal. 6 steel monsters rolled toward men whose understanding of war had been shaped by horses, swords, magic, and courage. The collision was psychological before it became physical. A cavalry regiment was ordered forward. The horses refused. Whips came down, screamed. Some animals advanced. Most turned sideways. The sight, smell, and mechanical roar of the armored vehicles destroyed the formation before Greyhaven fired a shot. Then the machine guns opened. The cavalry scattered. Adrian did not send the armored vehicles deeply into enemy lines. That would have been foolish. They were demonstrations, not yet mature weapons. Instead, he used them as moving fortifications. Rifle infantry followed behind. Artillery advanced in stages. Engineers watched the tracks carefully, recording every mechanical failure. One vehicle lost a drive wheel after less than an hour. Another overheated. A third became trapped in a shallow ditch and required 2 teams of horses to pull it free. Marcus rode beside Adrian's command post and looked toward the struggling machine. Your terrifying new weapon appears to have been defeated by a hole. Adrian lowered his telescope. That is useful. Marcus stared at him. Useful? Now we know the suspension needs improvement. Marcus shook his head. You are the only man I have ever met who becomes happier when his weapons break. I become happier when they break during testing, instead of during the battle that decides the empire. The old general grunted. That answer was difficult to argue with. The coalition commanders reacted exactly as Adrian expected. They withdrew from the field. Not because their army had been destroyed, because they needed time to understand what they had seen. That pause was more valuable than victory. Adrian used it immediately. Captured ground was fortified. Ammunition depots moved forward. Rail engineers extended temporary supply lines. Field telegraph crews connected headquarters. Medical stations were established before the next engagement. Every hour the Crusaders spent arguing was an hour Greyhaven spent organizing. Inside the Sarathi headquarters, arguments nearly became violence. Archbishop Severian demanded a direct assault. Velmoran generals refused. Dravik officers accused Sareth of hiding information about Adrian's weapons. Mercenary captains demanded additional payment. Mage representatives insisted the armored machines were vulnerable to concentrated magical attacks. Everyone offered a solution. Nobody wanted responsibility for failure. That was the difference Adrian intended to exploit. He was fighting an alliance. Alliances rarely broke because everyone disagreed about the enemy. They broke because everyone disagreed about sacrifice. So Adrian increased the cost of cooperation. Greyhaven intelligence agents spread another rumor. Sareth planned to preserve its paladins while sending foreign soldiers into the most dangerous assaults. Dravik troops heard it first, then Velmoran troops. By the time Sarathi commanders denied the accusation, the denial itself sounded suspicious. Adrian followed with something more dangerous than rumors. He released captured soldiers, thousands of them. Marcus objected. We fed them, treated their wounds, and now you want to send them back? Yes, they will fight us again. Some will then why? Adrian looked toward the prison camp. Because they have seen us. The prisoners had expected torture. Instead, Greyhaven physicians treated infected wounds. Officers recorded names. Food was distributed according to ration schedules rather than social rank. Ordinary soldiers saw workshops where commoners earned wages higher than servants in noble estates. They saw veterans receiving land. They saw schools. They saw machines operated by craftsmen without magical blood. Adrian did not need every prisoner to become loyal. He needed them to talk. Released men turned to their armies carrying stories. Greyhaven was not the hell described by Sarathi priests. Its soldiers were paid. Its wounded were treated. Its commoners were educated. Its prince ate the same field bread as junior officers during campaigns. The stories spread through campfires. That was enough. A crusade depended on moral certainty. Adrian poisoned certainty. Within weeks, desertions increased. Small at first, 5 men. 12, 30. Then entire mercenary companies disappeared at night. Adrian established surrender stations beyond the front line. Anyone approaching without weapons received food and temporary protection. Sarathi commanders ordered deserters executed. That made desertion more frightening. It did not make loyalty stronger. Then winter began approaching. The coalition had planned to conquer Greyhaven before the cold season. Instead, they had spent months marching, starving, arguing, and fighting a prince who refused to give them the battle they wanted. Adrian saw the weather reports. He called his officers together. A massive campaign map covered the headquarters wall. Marcus stood near the center. "We have an opportunity," Adrian nodded. The coalition had divided its forces. Sereth held the central road. Valmora controlled the eastern valley. Dravik troops protected the western supply corridor. The divisions were close enough to support one another under ordinary circumstances. Adrian intended to make the circumstances extraordinary. "Target Dravik first," he said. Marcus studied the map. "They are the weakest. More importantly, they are the angriest." Dravik had already lost one war to Adrian. Its soldiers distrusted Sarath. Its officers believed the Crusade leadership treated them as expendable. That made them vulnerable. Adrian sent a false intelligence leak suggesting Greyhaven would attack Sereth's center. The leak was deliberately easy to intercept. Sarathi commanders believed it. They reinforced the central road. Valmora sent reserves to support them. Dravik was ordered to hold its position with reduced strength. Adrian waited until the transfer was complete. Then every Greyhaven mobile unit moved west. Rail transport carried infantry through the night. Horse-drawn artillery followed reinforced roads. Armored prototypes were loaded onto heavy transport platforms, rather than wasting their engines on long marches. Telegraph operators coordinated timing. By dawn, nearly 40,000 Greyhaven troops and allied Imperial units had concentrated opposite Dravik. The enemy had fewer than 20,000. Marcus looked toward Adrian. "That is almost unfair." Adrian adjusted his gloves. "War is not a sporting event. Artillery opened fire, not a scattered bombardment. A planned sequence. Heavy guns targeted fortifications. Field guns hit artillery positions. Mortars fired behind defensive lines. Marksmen targeted officers who exposed themselves. Dravik troops held for 2 hours. Then Greyhaven infantry began advancing behind moving artillery support. Rifle companies suppressed trenches. Engineers cut obstacles. Machine gun teams established overlapping sectors. The armored vehicles rolled through the center. One was destroyed when a battle mage struck its side with concentrated lightning. The crew died. Adrian watched the smoke rise. His expression did not change. Marcus knew him well enough to see the anger anyway. "Do we pull them back?" "No." "Another could be hit." "Yes." Marcus understood. Adrian hated losses, but he hated emotional command decisions more. The machines still served their purpose. So they continued. Greyhaven artillery identified the mage position. 3 guns fired. The ridge disappeared beneath explosions. The Dravik line cracked shortly after noon. Adrian immediately sent mounted units behind them. Not to massacre retreating soldiers. To seize crossroads, the maneuver transformed retreat into isolation. Thousands surrendered, others scattered north. By sunset, the entire western wing of the Crusade had ceased to exist as an organized force. The Sarathi command received the news too late. They attempted to redeploy west. Adrian had already moved again. His army did not remain where it had won. That concept confused coalition intelligence. Traditional victorious armies rested after major engagements. They looted, they celebrated, they waited for noble commanders to reorganize. Greyhaven refueled, rearmed, counted casualties. Moved 2 days later, Adrian struck the Eastern Coalition wing. Valmora had prepared better. Mage bunkers, anti-vehicle ditches, hidden artillery. Adrian did not attack directly. He bombarded one sector for hours. Valmora reinforced it. Then he stopped. The next morning, he repeated the bombardment somewhere else. Again, reserves shifted. For 5 days, Greyhaven created threats. None became major attacks. The Velmoran commanders began exhausting their troops, moving from position to position. On the sixth night, Adrian did nothing. Velmora waited for an assault that never came. On the seventh morning, exhausted soldiers relaxed. That was when Greyhaven attacked 3 places simultaneously. 1 assault was real. 2 were deception. The Velmoran commander guessed wrong. His reserves moved toward a false attack. Greyhaven engineers crossed a shallow river farther north and established a bridgehead before midday. Armored vehicles followed. By evening, the enemy flank was compromised. Velmora began an organized withdrawal. Adrian let them retreat. Marcus questioned him. We could press harder. We could, so why stop? Because I do not want Velmora destroyed. Marcus looked at him. You want them to leave? Exactly. Adrian sent terms. Velmora could withdraw from the crusade, retain its prisoners, and receive access to limited Greyhaven commercial trade after the war. In return, it would abandon Sereth. The Velmoran king rejected the offer publicly, then accepted privately. 3 nights later, Velmoran forces began retreating east. Sarathi commanders were furious. They declared Velmora traitorous. Velmora responded by accusing Sereth of wasting allied lives. The crusade had begun with nearly 200,000 soldiers. Now its largest partner had departed. Dravik was shattered. Mercenaries were deserting. Only Sereth remained committed. And commitment without capacity was merely stubbornness. Archbishop Severian refused to retreat. He gathered nearly 60,000 remaining troops around the fortress city of Aramor. The fortress had enormous stone walls reinforced with magic. Sereth believed Adrian's artillery could not break them quickly. For once, they were correct. Adrian inspected the defenses. Marcus stood beside him. A direct siege could take months. Yes, winter is close. Yes. Then we bypass them. Adrian shook his head. No. Marcus looked surprised. Adrian pointed toward Aramor. Sereth has concentrated almost everything here, which is why attacking it is dangerous, which is why leaving it intact is dangerous. Adrian had spent months avoiding unnecessary sieges. This one was different. Aramor was not merely a fortress. It was the Crusade's symbol. If it stood, Sereth could claim the war continued. If it fell, the story ended. Adrian deployed heavy artillery. The newest guns had longer barrels and improved shells. Rail lines delivered ammunition directly to rear depots. Observers mapped impact points. Artillery officers recorded corrections. The bombardment began. For 3 days, the walls survived. On the 4th, cracks appeared. Sarathi mages reinforced damaged sections. Greyhaven changed targets. Instead of pounding the same wall endlessly, artillery began attacking towers, supply stores, barracks, and roads. Adrian wanted the defenders unable to rest. Day and night, shells fell. The psychological pressure became unbearable. Then Greyhaven engineers began tunneling. Sereth discovered one tunnel and collapsed it. Another remained hidden. Charges were placed beneath an outer bastion. Before sunrise, the explosives detonated. The bastion lifted. Stone, dust, and bodies filled the sky. The breach opened. Sarathi troops rushed toward it. They expected Greyhaven infantry. Instead, machine gun fire entered first. Artillery shells followed. Smoke covered the breach. Then armored vehicles advanced. The machines had been improved after months of battlefield failure. Wider tracks, stronger gears, better engine cooling, thicker frontal armor, still imperfect, still unreliable, but no longer merely experimental. One crossed the shattered wall. Then another. Sarathi defenders launched magic. The leading vehicle stopped after its track broke. Its cannon continued firing. Infantry poured around it. The battle became brutal. Street by street, house by house, Sarathi paladins fought with terrifying courage. Some destroyed rifle squads before being surrounded. Mages collapsed buildings. Greyhaven engineers blasted through walls to avoid exposed streets. Medical units worked constantly. For the first time in months, Adrian's losses became severe. Marcus found him during the second night. We have lost more than 2,000. Adrian looked over the casualty reports. I know. We can withdraw and continue the siege. Adrian remained silent. Marcus waited. Finally, Adrian looked toward the city. If we withdraw now, we repeat this battle later. You cannot know that. No. Adrian looked back at him. But I know what Aramor represents. He ordered the assault continued. Not blindly. Positions were rotated. Fresh troops entered. Wounded units withdrew. Artillery shifted deeper. Engineers cut new routes. By the 3rd morning, Greyhaven reached the cathedral district. Archbishop Severian refused surrender. He stood before the grand cathedral surrounded by the last sacred guard. Adrian entered the square behind a formation of riflemen. Severian saw him. So the machine prince finally comes personally. Adrian stopped at a safe distance. I came to accept your surrender. There will be none, then this ends here. Severian raised his staff. You believe you defeated Faith? Adrian shook his head. No. That answer surprised him. I defeated your army. Severian stared. Adrian continued. Faith is not artillery, it is not a fortress. It is not yours to spend. The archbishop's face twisted. You gave peasants weapons and told them they were equal to kings. No. Adrian's voice became colder. I gave them tools and discovered some kings were less useful than peasants. Severian screamed an incantation. Light erupted around him. The remaining paladins charged. Greyhaven riflemen fired. The square filled with smoke. The final resistance ended in less than a minute. Aramor fell. The crusade ended with it. But Adrian did not march on Sereth's capital. Not immediately. Instead, he announced terms. The church could retain religious independence. Sereth would dismantle its offensive military orders. Foreign troops would leave disputed territories. Greyhaven prisoners would be returned. Trade routes would reopen. And Sereth would recognize Adrian's right to govern without religious interference. Many of Adrian's generals wanted harsher terms. Marcus understood why he refused. You do not want occupation, no. Too expensive, too unstable, and it would make every believer on the continent think we intend to destroy their religion. Adrian nodded, which would give the next Severian an army twice as large. Marcus smiled. You really do hate simple victories. Simple victories create complicated wars. News of Aramor reached the imperial capital before Adrian returned. The political effect was catastrophic. For his enemies, Prince Lucien had built much of his power through Sarathi religious support. That support collapsed. The first prince attempted to rally nobles against Adrian. Several changed sides overnight. The fifth prince quietly returned to his wife's kingdom. The third prince sent Adrian a letter offering military cooperation. The sixth prince publicly congratulated him and very wisely made no claim to the throne. Then Emperor Cassian summoned the full succession council. This time Adrian did not enter as the useless seventh prince. He entered as the commander who had defeated 2 continental coalitions. The hall looked different, or perhaps he did. Cassian sat on the throne. He remained weak, but Greyhaven medicine had kept him alive. Every major noble house attended. Military commanders filled the side galleries. Representatives from provincial governments stood behind them. Cassian raised one hand. The hall became silent. He spoke slowly. My sons were raised believing the throne was a prize. None moved. I encouraged that belief. His eyes passed over them. I believed competition would reveal strength. Cassian paused. It revealed ambition. He looked toward Adrian. One son asked me for armies. Toward another prince, one asked for noble alliances. Toward another, one sought church support. Then back to Adrian. And one asked me for a ruined province, criminals, wounded veterans, abandoned mines, and 10,000 gold crowns. A quiet murmur moved through the hall. Cassian almost smiled. I thought he had chosen exile. Adrian remembered that day, how everyone laughed. He built roads, factories, hospitals, an army. He defeated invasions that should have destroyed him. He did not inherit power. He manufactured it. The emperor rose with visible effort. A servant moved to assist. Cassian refused. He wanted to stand alone. The next emperor of Ardinia will be Adrian Valcrest. Silence. Then the military gallery erupted. Veterans struck fists against breastplates. Provincial representatives bowed. Several nobles followed slowly. Others remained rigid. Adrian did not smile. He watched who hesitated. Those names mattered. Cassian looked at him. Approach. Adrian walked toward the throne. The emperor removed the ceremonial sword of succession. He held it out. Adrian accepted it. The system voice sounded inside his mind. National authority threshold achieved. Control over a major sovereign state recognized. Military authority expanded. Industrial authority expanded. Administrative authority expanded. New strategic development pathways became available. Adrian's mind filled with possibilities. National rail networks, electrical grids, telephones, modern universities, chemical industry, advanced engines, aircraft foundations, large naval construction, radio, mass production, mechanized agriculture, public health systems. The scale was different now. Greyhaven had been a laboratory. Ardinia would become the machine. Cassian leaned closer. Do not destroy the empire trying to improve it. Adrian looked at him. I will try. Cassian laughed quietly. That is the least reassuring answer you could give. The succession ceremony ended before sunset. Outside, crowds filled the capital. Many celebrated. Some feared him. Some called him the Thunder Prince. Others called him the Iron Prince. Adrian disliked both. Titles were irrelevant. Capacity mattered. That night, he stood on the palace balcony looking across the city he would eventually rule. Marcus joined him. You won, Adrian shook his head. The succession. The war. Which all of them? Adrian looked north, then west, then toward the distant southern horizon. No. Marcus followed his gaze. Adrian had received intelligence earlier that evening. Ships from the Western maritime powers had begun appearing near Ardinian trade routes. Foreign governments were sending observers to purchase rifles. Neighboring kingdoms were recruiting engineers. Dravik had begun building its first industrial workshops. Velmora was experimenting with railways. Even Sarath had quietly purchased modern printing equipment. The transformation Adrian predicted had begun. The world was learning, which meant Greyhaven's technological lead would shrink. Adrian handed Marcus the intelligence report. The old general read it. So what now? Adrian looked toward the stars. In my first life, industrial nations spent decades discovering how efficiently they could kill one another. Marcus frowned. You speak as though you have seen it. Adrian ignored that. If this continent repeats the same path without understanding where it leads, rifles become machine guns. Machine guns become artillery systems. Railways mobilize millions. Industry turns entire populations into weapons. Marcus read the report again. And you intend to stop that? No. Adrian's answer was immediate. Marcus looked at him. I intend to control the transition. Below them, the capital lights flickered. Soon they would be electric. Beyond the city, railways would spread. Factories would rise. Armies would modernize. Kingdoms would either adapt or disappear. And somewhere across the Western Sea, an empire Adrian had not yet faced was already studying every report about him. A naval power. Rich. Industrializing. Possessing colonies across distant coasts. Its rulers had reached the same conclusion as Adrian's brothers. The Iron Prince could not be allowed to become stronger. Inside a palace thousands of kilometers away, foreign ministers gathered around a map of Ardinia. One admiral placed several markers along the coast. Greyhaven defeated armies on land. Another man smiled. Then we will not fight him on land. A document was placed on the table. Plans for a naval blockade, economic strangulation, foreign-funded rebellions, assassination networks, and the deployment of the largest fleet on the continent. Back in Ardinia, the system voice echoed one final time that night. A major external threat had been detected. Naval Development Authority was now available. Adrian closed his eyes, then smiled. His enemies had finally discovered the sea. Unfortunately for them, so had he. The first shells landed before sunrise, not on a battlefield, on a fishing village. Adrian was in the capital when the message arrived. 3 foreign warships had appeared beyond the eastern cape, ignored every signal from the harbor watch, and opened fire on coastal warehouses belonging to the Ardinian crown. The attack lasted less than 20 minutes. Then the ships disappeared back into the fog. 14 civilians were dead. 2 grain depots burned. 1 customs station had been destroyed. No declaration of war had been delivered. No ultimatum had been issued. Marcus read the report beside him. So this is how they intend to begin. Adrian folded the paper. No. Marcus looked at him. This is how they intend to frighten us. The attackers belonged to the Varelian Maritime Empire. For nearly 2 centuries, Varelia had dominated Western trade. Its merchant companies controlled distant colonies. Its bankers financed wars between smaller states. Its navy protected enormous commercial routes stretching across 3 seas. Unlike Ardinia, Varelia had already begun limited industrial development before Adrian's rise. Its shipyards used advanced dry docks. Its foundries produced reliable naval artillery. Its academies trained navigators, engineers, and officers from childhood. Most important of all, its political leaders had noticed what the continental kingdoms had ignored. Greyhaven was not merely dangerous because of rifles. Greyhaven threatened the economic balance of the entire world. Adrian's factories produced steel more cheaply. His standardized workshops repaired equipment faster. His railways moved goods at lower cost. His government had begun replacing dozens of aristocratic toll systems with unified taxation. Merchants who once depended on Varelian financing were slowly looking toward Ardinia. Markets were shifting. The war had begun before the first shell was fired. The shell merely admitted it. 3 days later, Varelia issued its demands. Ardinia would restrict military production. Greyhaven industrial exports would be capped. Foreign engineers would receive access to certain factories. Ardinian naval construction would remain limited, and several Western ports would accept Varelian inspectors. Marcus finished reading the document. They are asking us to become their client state. Adrian looked toward the ministers surrounding the war table. No. He pointed at the final paragraph. They are asking whether we are willing to become their client state without forcing them to fight. The Minister of Finance spoke carefully. Your Highness, their fleet is enormous. How enormous? Intelligence estimates more than 100 major warships and several hundred smaller vessels across the empire. Adrian nodded. And ours? Silence. Ardinia had ships, merchant vessels, patrol cutters, rivercraft, a few outdated war galleys maintained mostly for ceremony. Against Varelia, they were decorations. One noble minister cleared his throat. Perhaps temporary concessions would buy us time. Adrian looked at him. The man hesitated. For development. Under inspectors whose purpose is preventing development. No answer came. Adrian dismissed the council. Then he summoned engineers, naval officers, shipwrights, steel producers, coal managers, railway planners, bankers, and fishermen. The nobles found the final group ridiculous. Adrian did not. Fishermen understood currents, weather, coastal geography, harbor conditions. Every kind of knowledge mattered. He asked one question. How quickly can we build a navy? The chief shipwright answered first. One capable of defeating Varelia? Eventually, the man swallowed years. Then we do not begin by defeating their navy. The room became quiet. Adrian turned toward the coastal map. We begin by making their navy expensive. Varelia expected battleships. Adrian gave them mines. The concept was simple. If Ardinia could not challenge large warships directly, it could restrict where those warships could safely sail. Greyhaven engineers began designing explosive naval mines triggered by contact mechanisms. Harbor entrances were mapped. Defensive channels were established. Coastal artillery batteries were hidden behind earthworks. Observers received telescopes and signal equipment. Telegraph lines connected ports directly to military headquarters. Lighthouses became surveillance stations. Fishing boats became scouts. Varelia expected primitive coastal defense. Instead, every harbor began becoming part of an information network. Then Adrian expanded beyond defense. Small, fast torpedo craft entered development. Their engines were unreliable at first. Their range was terrible. Crews hated them. Adrian approved more prototypes. The system had unlocked naval engineering principles, but just as before, knowledge did not magically produce competent factories. Boilers exploded. Propeller shafts failed. Hull designs cracked. Engineers learned, failed, learned again. Adrian kept records of every failure. Months passed. Varelian pressure increased. Warships began stopping Ardinian merchant vessels. Cargo was searched. Ships were delayed. Insurance prices exploded. Foreign merchants became nervous. The blockade was not yet official. It did not need to be. Economic strangulation could kill without banners. The first major confrontation occurred outside Port Elian. 4 Varelian warships approached the harbor demanding inspection authority. The coastal commander refused. The Varelian admiral ordered one cruiser forward. It entered the outer channel. A fisherman watching from a cliff counted the ship's position. The information moved through signal flags to a telegraph station. Seconds later, a message reached the harbor commander. Target entering marked zone. The commander raised his hand. Nobody fired. The cruiser advanced. Then the sea erupted beneath it. A naval mine detonated against the hull. The ship lurched violently. Water poured through ruptured plating. Varelian guns opened fire blindly against the shore. Hidden Ardinian batteries answered. Heavy shells struck the crippled vessel. The remaining warships withdrew. Port Elian had not defeated the Varelian navy. But for the first time in generations, a small continental state had bloodied one of its ships without presenting a fleet to be destroyed. The political effect was immediate. Neutral governments began watching. Varelian newspapers demanded retaliation. Admirals demanded invasion. Merchants demanded caution. Bankers demanded compensation. Adrian saw the division. Good. Powerful empires were not monoliths. Every war created factions. The question was which faction became more afraid of continuing than of stopping. Varelia escalated. A formal blockade was declared. 20 warships spread along Ardinia's major coastlines. Commercial traffic collapsed. Prices rose. Imports disappeared. Adrian had anticipated it. Months earlier, rail construction had been redirected toward inland trade routes. New agreements had been signed with Velmora. Coal imports were replaced by domestic production. Machine tools were copied wherever possible. Agricultural reforms increased grain output. The blockade hurt. It did not cripple. That confused Varelia. Their diplomats had predicted economic collapse within weeks. Instead, Ardinian industry continued operating. Then Adrian attacked their assumptions again. He did not send warships toward the blockade. He sent commerce raiders, converted merchant vessels. Fast, cheap, moderately armed. Designed not to fight naval battles but to hunt supply ships. Varelian naval power depended on distant bases. Distant bases depended on coal, food, replacement parts, ammunition. Adrian's raiders targeted those lifelines. One captured a coal transport. Another burned a supply depot on a small island. A third attacked a lightly protected repair vessel. The damage was modest. The reaction was not. Varelia had to assign warships to convoy protection. Every ship guarding coal was one less ship maintaining the blockade. Adrian had learned this lesson years ago in another world. The strongest weapon was sometimes not destruction. It was forcing the enemy to spend resources everywhere. Then came the assassinations. 3 Ardenian engineers disappeared. 1 railway supervisor was found dead. A factory accountant attempted to flee with production records. The intelligence service traced payments through merchant houses connected to Varelian companies. Adrian ordered arrests. But he did something else as well. He created redundancy. No single engineer would control an entire program. Designs were copied. Departments were compartmentalized. Factories could continue operating if senior personnel vanished. Marcus studied the new system. They can still kill people. Yes, but not projects. That is the idea. Adrian had seen governments collapse because too much knowledge lived inside individual heads. He refused to allow Ardenia to make the same mistake. Then Varelia found a more dangerous weapon, rebellion. The southern province of Carthage had long resented imperial taxation. Several noble families controlled private armies there. Varelian agents supplied them with gold, weapons, promises of independence. The rebellion began with the assassination of an imperial governor. Within days, 3 cities declared for the rebels. The first prince, who had disappeared from court months earlier, emerged among them. He proclaimed Adrian an illegitimate tyrant. He promised to restore traditional noble rights. And behind him flew banners financed by Varelian merchants. Marcus slammed the intelligence report onto the table. They finally found an army willing to fight on land. Adrian studied the map. Carthage was rich farmland. Losing it would damage food production. Destroying it would be worse. He refused to send heavy artillery against the cities. Instead, he attacked the rebellion financially. Bank accounts connected to rebel houses were frozen. Imperial debts owed to their families were suspended. Merchants who continued supplying rebel territory lost licenses. Rail lines bypassed rebellious estates. Loyal towns received tax relief. Common soldiers who deserted rebel armies were promised amnesty. Noble officers received no such guarantee. The distinction spread quickly. Rebel leaders wanted their peasants to believe everyone faced execution. Adrian made sure the peasants knew otherwise. Within 2 weeks, desertions increased. Within 1 month, several rebel garrisons surrendered. The first prince responded with terror. Villages suspected of aiding imperial forces were burned. Hostages were taken. That destroyed him. Adrian published the evidence everywhere. Newspapers printed testimony. Pamphlets carried names of dead villagers. Captured rebel orders were displayed publicly. The prince who claimed to defend tradition became known as a butcher, protecting estates with foreign money. By the time Adrian's army reached the rebel capital, resistance had already fractured. The final battle lasted less than a day. The first prince escaped toward the coast. A Varelian ship waited for him. It never reached shore. An Ardenian coastal battery struck it beyond the harbor entrance. The vessel turned away. The first prince stood on the beach watching his escape disappear. Imperial cavalry arrested him before sunset. Adrian visited him once. His brother sat inside a guarded room wearing clothes still stained with sand. "You ruined everything," the first prince said. Adrian remained standing. "You accepted foreign weapons to start a civil war. I defended the empire you are destroying." "No," Adrian's voice remained quiet. "You defended the privileges you confused with the empire." His brother laughed bitterly. "Do you think commoners love you?" "No." "Then what makes you different from us?" Adrian thought about it. "I do not require them to love me." He turned toward the door. "I require the state to work." The rebellion ended. But Varelia had learned something. Adrian was harder to destabilize than expected. So its government approved direct invasion. The target was Greyhaven, not the capital, not the southern provinces. Greyhaven, the birthplace of Adrian's industrial system. The plan was ambitious. A massive fleet would land more than 60,000 troops on the northern coast. Naval artillery would support them. Varelian engineers would seize factories intact. Rail junctions would be captured. Greyhaven would be cut away from the empire. Foreign intelligence believed the operation could succeed before Adrian mobilized sufficient forces. Their estimates were based on horse movement. Adrian had railways. The invasion fleet appeared at dawn. More than 70 major vessels filled the horizon. Transports followed behind. Thousands of soldiers prepared to land. Varelian battleships opened fire against coastal defenses. Shells struck earthworks. Smoke covered the shore. Landing craft moved forward. From a distant observation tower, Adrian watched through a telescope. Marcus stood beside him. That is a lot of ships, yes. You have something unpleasant planned. Adrian did not answer. The first landing boats entered shallow water. Coastal artillery remained silent. The enemy admiral assumed the bombardment had destroyed it. Then signal flags appeared along the ridge. Batteries opened fire from concealed positions farther inland. The shells were not aimed at the landing boats. They targeted the transports behind them. Chaos spread through the fleet. Then smaller Ardinian craft emerged from hidden fast torpedo boats. Varelian escorts turned toward them. Exactly as Adrian wanted, the escort screen opened. Beyond the horizon, smoke appeared. Marcus narrowed his eyes, then smiled. The first true Ardinian warships were arriving. Not elegant wooden vessels covered in decoration. Steel-hulled cruisers, compact compared to Varelian battleships, powered by modern engines, armed with improved naval guns, built in secret shipyards for nearly 2 years. Greyhaven had not been ignoring the sea. It had been preparing quietly. The lead cruiser raised its battle flag. Behind it came another, then another. Varelian officers stared. Their intelligence reports had been wrong. Ardinia did have a navy. Adrian lowered his telescope. Marcus looked toward him. What message? Adrian's expression became cold. Tell them the age of Varelian control over our coast ends today. Far offshore, Ardinian guns turned toward the largest enemy fleet on the continent. And for the first time since his reincarnation, Adrian was about to fight a battle where the enemy possessed technology close enough to his own that victory could no longer be guaranteed by surprise. This time, he would have to win with doctrine, logistics, intelligence, and command. Everything he had built was finally going to be tested at once. The sea became fire. Ardinian naval guns thundered from beyond the morning haze, their first shells cutting through the air toward the Varelian formation. One landed short. The second struck the water beside a cruiser and threw a column of spray over its deck. The third hit. Steel screamed. Men disappeared beneath smoke and splinters. For several seconds, neither fleet fully understood what had happened. Then every gun that could bear opened fire. The horizon vanished beneath muzzle flashes. Adrian stood inside the coastal command bunker with one hand pressed against the operations table. Signals arrived continuously, range corrections, enemy headings, minefield reports, ammunition expenditure, damage estimates, rail movement, weather, visibility. Every piece of information was copied, checked, and moved to the correct officer. No shouting mobs surrounded him. No courtiers. No heroic knights begging for permission to charge. Only staff work. That was how Adrian preferred war. Marcus stared through an armored observation slit. The enemy battleships are turning. Toward our cruisers? Yes. Marcus glanced back. You wanted that? Of course. The Ardinian cruisers were faster. They were not built to trade blows with Varelia's heaviest ships. Adrian had no intention of allowing that. The lead Ardinian cruiser turned south. The second followed, then the third. To the Varelian admiral, it looked like retreat. He ordered pursuit. That was the first decision Adrian had been waiting for. Varelian battleships accelerated. Their supporting formations stretched. Transports remained closer to shore. Escort vessels tried to cover both groups. The fleet began dividing under pressure. Adrian looked toward the communications officer. Signal the Western Torpedo Group. The officer transmitted immediately. Hidden behind a distant rocky island, 6 small attack craft started their engines. They had spent hours waiting in silence. Their crews had complained. Their commanders had been told almost nothing. Now their purpose became obvious. They moved toward the exposed flank of the pursuing Varelian line. Fast, low, difficult to hit. The enemy noticed too late. Secondary guns opened fire. Water erupted around the boats. One disappeared in an explosion. Another lost speed. The remaining 4 continued. They launched. The torpedoes entered the water. One missed. Another failed mechanically. 2 kept running. The first struck the side of a Varelian armored cruiser. The detonation ripped open its lower hull. The second hit a battleship near the stern. The enormous vessel shuddered. Its speed dropped immediately. Marcus watched through the scope. That one is damaged badly. Not sunk. Does it matter? Yes. Marcus understood a moment later. A damaged battleship required assistance, tugs, escorts, repair vessels, crew evacuation preparation, protection. One wounded ship could consume the attention of several healthy ones. Adrian preferred that outcome. The Varelian fleet commander did not. He ordered his heavy line to slow. That allowed the Ardinian cruisers to widen distance. Then Adrian activated the second layer of the plan. Coastal batteries fired from positions previously concealed. Their targets were not the battleships. They were the landing transports. The first shell tore through a troop ship's upper deck. The second struck a cargo vessel carrying horses. Panic spread across the transport formation. Landing boats turned unpredictably. Some accelerated towards shore, others reversed. Command signals conflicted. Varelian naval officers realized too late that they were fighting two battles at once: a fleet engagement offshore, an amphibious landing under artillery fire. Adrian had spent months studying exactly how difficult that was. An invasion fleet had to coordinate ships, troops, landing sites, tides, supply unloading, artillery support, beach exits, and communications. Break enough links, and the invasion stopped being an operation. It became a traffic disaster. The first Varelian soldiers reached shore anyway. Thousands landed along the northern beaches. Naval bombardment had destroyed several defensive positions. Some Ardinian troops pulled back. Varelian officers believed they had created a breach. They pushed inland. Adrian allowed them. Marcus looked at the map. They have taken the first coastal village. Evacuated? The road? Intact. Adrian nodded. Marcus smiled faintly. You left them the road. I left them one road. The Varelian commander ashore ordered immediate advance. His objective was a rail junction 12 kilometers inland. Capture that and the landing force could disrupt Ardinian reinforcement. His troops moved fast. Too fast. The road narrowed between marshland on one side and wooded hills on the other. Varelian scouts searched for ambushes. They found none. The lead battalion reached a small stone bridge, still nothing. The commander relaxed. Then the bridge exploded behind them. Engineers had hidden charges inside its foundations. The rear column stopped. Seconds later, artillery opened fire from the hills. Varelian infantry scattered. Machine guns joined. The trapped front battalion attempted to advance. Another explosion destroyed the road ahead. They were sealed inside a prepared fire zone. Ardinian infantry emerged from concealed trenches. Breech loading rifles fired from both sides. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Hundreds surrendered. The survivors tried retreating through the marsh. Many abandoned equipment. Adrian watched casualty reports arrive. He felt no satisfaction. Only confirmation. The invasion doctrine worked. The naval battle continued offshore. Varelia still held the advantage in total tonnage and heavy guns. Adrian knew it. His commanders knew it. They refused a decisive line battle. Instead, Ardinian ships repeatedly approached, fired at favorable range, then disengaged under smoke. Torpedo boats threatened damaged vessels. Minefields restricted movement near the coast. Coastal guns made certain approaches dangerous. Varelian commanders faced a nightmare. Every direction contained a different threat. None alone was decisive. Together, they destroyed operational freedom. By evening, the Varelian admiral made the correct decision: withdraw, not flee. Withdraw. He ordered transports away from the coast. Landing forces that had not established secure positions were recalled. Damaged ships moved under escort. The fleet pulled beyond artillery range. Adrian did not pursue. Marcus looked disappointed. We could strike them while they are reorganizing. With what? Our cruisers, and risk the entire fleet beyond mine and coastal support? Marcus sighed. You are allergic to dramatic victories. I prefer repeatable ones. The first day ended. Varelia had lost 2 major warships sunk or crippled, several smaller vessels, thousands of soldiers, and most importantly, confidence in an easy invasion. Ardinia had lost ships too. 1 torpedo craft sank. A destroyer burned. Several coastal positions were destroyed. Hundreds were dead. Adrian ordered every loss recorded publicly inside the military. No heroic lies, impossible casualty ratios. Officers needed reality. Governments that lied to themselves eventually lost to enemies that did not. The Varelians changed strategy. They moved farther offshore. Instead of direct landing, they intensified blockade pressure. Merchant routes were intercepted hundreds of kilometers away. Neutral shipping companies were warned not to trade with Ardinia. Varelian bankers threatened lenders. Insurance markets closed. This was where the war became more dangerous. Adrian could shoot ships. He could not shoot every bank on the continent. So he created alternatives. Ardinia began guaranteeing shipping losses for approved merchants. Foreign traders who accepted risk received reduced tariffs. Rail connections to neutral neighbors expanded. Government purchasing contracts stabilized essential imports. The treasury suffered. The economy slowed, but it did not collapse. Adrian met with the Minister of Finance every morning. One day, the minister placed a set of reports on the table. War spending is becoming unsustainable. Define unsustainable. At present rates, reserves fall below safe levels within 7 months. Adrian studied the figures. Then we need revenue. The minister stirring a blockade? Yes. From where Adrian looked west, from their blockade. The minister thought he had misheard. Adrian explained. Varelia was spending enormous money maintaining distant squadrons. Coal repairs, crew wages. Food, ammunition, replacement parts. Every ship operating away from home consumed resources. Adrian wanted to increase that cost further. Ardinian raiders expanded operations against Varelian colonial shipping. But this time, they were ordered to capture cargo whenever possible. Coal became Ardinian coal. Metal became Ardinian metal. Luxury goods were auctioned. Captured merchant ships were sold through neutral intermediaries. The blockade began partially financing resistance to itself. Varelia responded by increasing escorts. That increased costs again. Adrian smiled when he saw the numbers. Marcus shook his head. You are turning piracy into accounting, privateering. That sounds more respectable. It is still accounting. Then diplomacy entered the war. Velmora offered secret negotiations. Its government feared Varelian dominance more than Adrian's rise. Dravek, humiliated but recovering, wanted trade access. Several merchant republics wanted Ardinian steel and machine tools. Adrian offered them all something different. Railway contracts, technology licenses, military training, coal agreements. He avoided exclusive alliances. He wanted dependencies spread across many states. If too many countries profited from Ardinian survival, Varelia would no longer be fighting one empire. It would be fighting everyone's balance sheet. Within months, neutral pressure increased. Varelian diplomats called Adrian an economic aggressor. Adrian publicly released the original Varelian demands. Foreign newspapers printed them. The demand for industrial inspections became particularly damaging. Smaller nations suddenly understood the precedent. If Varelia could limit Ardinian industry by force, it could do the same to them later. The blockade lost moral support, not military strength, but wars were never only military. Then Varelia escalated again. Its fleet attacked a major Ardinian port at night. This time they had studied the minefields. Small vessels cleared channels. Naval artillery bombarded defensive guns. Landing parties seized a lighthouse. For the first time, the enemy successfully entered a protected harbor. The local commander sent an urgent telegraph. Marcus reached Adrian with the message after midnight. They broke through. Adrian was already dressed. How many ships? At least 14 inside the outer harbor. Landing force unknown. Rail status. Adrian moved to the command room. Maps were spread. Officers arrived within minutes. Adrian asked for no speeches. He gave orders. 2 infantry divisions began loading onto trains. Artillery moved first. Then ammunition. Field hospitals followed. The entire reinforcement sequence had been rehearsed. By dawn, thousands of troops were already moving. Varelian intelligence had estimated 3 days. Ardinia began arriving in less than 1. That was what railways did to strategy. Distance changed. The Varelian landing force seized warehouses near the docks. They expected time to build defenses. Instead, Ardinian artillery opened fire that evening. The invaders were stunned. Their commander assumed Greyhaven elite units had already been nearby. They had not. They had simply traveled faster than his planning model allowed. The battle for Port Veron became the bloodiest coastal engagement of the war. Varelian naval guns supported troops from the harbor. Adrian needed those ships removed. Coastal artillery could not reach them effectively through the urban terrain, so he approved a risky night operation. 3 torpedo craft entered through a narrow canal used by fishing vessels. The route was shallow. 1 boat grounded. 2 continued. They moved without navigation lights. Harbor fires reflected against the water. Varelian sailors spotted them at the last moment. Machine guns opened fire. 1 Ardinian boat exploded. The second continued. Its captain launched both torpedoes at the nearest cruiser. 1 struck. The cruiser began listing. More importantly, panic spread through the harbor squadron. Varelian ships started repositioning in darkness. 1 collided with another. A third entered a known mine sector. The explosion shook the harbor. At sunrise, the enemy fleet withdrew. Without naval support, the landing force became trapped. Adrian offered surrender. The Varelian commander refused. He expected rescue. 3 days later, food ran low. 5 days later, ammunition became critical. On the sixth day, more than 9,000 Varelian soldiers surrendered. It was the largest capture of the war. Adrian treated them carefully. Officers were separated. Wounded received medical care. Soldiers were allowed to write letters home. Marcus understood immediately. Another propaganda campaign. Truth is easier. Letters reached Varelia describing proper treatment. Families began asking why their sons were dying in a war that had never been formally explained. The Varelian parliament divided. Merchants wanted peace. Naval hardliners demanded total war. Colonial officials complained that raiders were damaging trade. Banks complained government borrowing costs were rising. Admirals insisted one decisive victory could still solve everything. Adrian knew that argument well. Governments often continued losing wars because victory was always supposedly one battle away. Then intelligence brought the most important report yet. Varelia was preparing its grand fleet. Not a raid, not a blockade squadron. Every ships, cruisers, transports, support vessels. The objective was simple. Destroy the Ardinian fleet in one battle, then blockade every major port without resistance. Marcus read the report. They want Trafalgar. Adrian looked at him. What? Marcus frowned. You make that face whenever I accidentally say something that belongs to your mysterious old life. Adrian ignored him. The system voice echoed inside his mind. Naval Warfare Authority had crossed a major threshold. Advanced fire control principles became available. Improved torpedoes, naval radio, range-finding systems, submarine foundations. Adrian stopped breathing for a moment. Not mature ones. Not safe ones. Early designs. Unreliable engines. Dangerous batteries. Limited underwater endurance. Exactly the sort of machine most sensible governments would avoid during wartime. Adrian ordered immediate prototype construction. Marcus found out 2 weeks later. He stood inside the naval workshop staring at a long steel hull. You intend to put men inside that? Yes. Underwater? Yes. Voluntarily? Adrian looked at it. That part may be difficult. The first submarine nearly killed its crew during testing. The ventilation system failed. The second developed leaks. The third successfully submerged, traveled several kilometers, and returned. Adrian approved a small combat flotilla. He did not expect them to sink the Grand Fleet. He expected them to shape its behavior. A fleet threatened from beneath the surface could no longer move casually. Escorts had to screen. Lookouts had to watch. Formation speed changed. Every new threat demanded attention. Adrian wanted Varelian commanders overloaded. The Grand Fleet sailed 6 weeks later. It was magnificent. Dozens of heavy warships, thousands of sailors. Enough artillery to flatten coastal cities. Foreign observers believed Ardinia's navy would be annihilated. Adrian did not disagree about the raw numbers. So he refused to offer his fleet where Varelia expected. Instead, Ardinian ships withdrew toward the Narrows, a strait between two island chains. Constricted waters, known minefields, hidden coastal guns, submarine approach routes. The Varelian admiral hesitated. He understood the danger. Political pressure forced him forward. Varelia needed victory. He entered the Narrows. Adrian stood inside the fleet command center on the island of KL. Radio reports arrived. Enemy lead squadron entering. Second squadron following. Destroyers screening. Mine-clearing vessels active. Adrian waited. Marcus stood beside him now. No more ships entered now. No, the center of the fleet reached the narrowest point. Adrian finally spoke. Close the gate. Mines were released from hidden channels behind the Varelian formation. Coastal guns opened fire. Ardinian cruisers emerged ahead. Submarines approached from the flank. The Varelian Grand Fleet suddenly found itself inside a corridor of death. The battle lasted 14 hours. No single weapon decided it. Mines crippled ships. Submarines forced evasive maneuvers. Coastal artillery punished vessels that moved too close to shore. Ardinian cruisers concentrated fire on damaged targets. Torpedo craft attacked after sunset. Radio allowed Adrian's commanders to coordinate faster than the Varelians expected. One battleship turned to avoid a submarine and entered a minefield. Another slowed to assist and was hit by coastal artillery. A cruiser attempted to break through the northern exit and encountered the main Ardinian squadron. The Varelian admiral fought brilliantly. He extracted much of his fleet, but not enough. By dawn, the sea was covered with wreckage. Varelia had lost the battle. Not annihilated, defeated. That distinction mattered. Adrian immediately sent peace terms. He did not demand colonies. He did not demand occupation. He demanded recognition of Ardinian sovereignty. End of the blockade. Freedom of industrial development. Compensation for civilian losses. Mutual commercial access. And withdrawal of support for anti-Ardinian rebellions. Aurelian hardliners rejected everything. Then their parliament received casualty lists. Their merchants received shipping loss reports. Their banks received debt projections. Their colonial governors requested more naval protection. The Grand Fleet could be rebuilt. The political consensus could not. 3 months later, negotiations began. 6 months later, the Treaty of Kale was signed. The blockade ended. Ardinian merchant ships returned to sea. Foreign diplomats arrived in the capital. Factories expanded again. And Adrian became emperor shortly afterward when Cassian finally died. The old emperor passed quietly. No assassination, no rebellion, no final battle. Adrian was beside him. Cassian's last words were simple. Did the empire survive? Adrian answered, yes. Cassian smiled. Then make sure it becomes worth surviving. Emperor Adrian Valcrest was crowned in winter. There were no enormous tournaments, no week-long aristocratic celebrations. He shortened the ceremony, then returned to work. Railway budgets, education reform, naval reconstruction, agricultural mechanization, electrical research, public sand academies, industrial safety, national banking. Marcus complained that Adrian had conquered half the continent only to become a clerk. Adrian disagreed. Administration was conquest against decay. The next 10 years transformed Ardinia. Rail lines crossed the empire. Telegraph became telephone. Factories grew into industrial cities. Electric lights appeared in the capital. Hospitals adopted standardized sanitation. Universities trained engineers who had never held noble titles. Military academies admitted commoners. Promotion increasingly depended on examination and performance. Agricultural machinery reduced famine risk. Mass printing expanded literacy. The army became mechanized. Armored vehicles improved. Aircraft appeared first as reconnaissance machines. Then as weapons. Adrian hated that progression. He allowed it anyway, because other nations were building them too. The world did exactly what he predicted. It adapted. Velmora industrialized, Dravik modernized, Varelia rebuilt its fleet. Sareth established technical schools. Distant states copied Ardinian doctrine. The technological gap narrowed. Adrian's advantage could no longer be simply possessing better weapons, so he changed strategy again. He built institutions, research academies, standardization bureaus, industrial laboratories, professional civil services, reserve systems, military planning staffs, intelligence agencies. His greatest weapon stopped being any particular machine. It became the state's ability to create the next machine before enemies understood why the current one mattered. That was harder to steal. Then the system changed. For years, it had rewarded conquest, industry, military, territory, national influence. One night, when Adrian was nearly 50, the mechanical voice returned with a message unlike any before. Global influence threshold achieved. Modernization objective surpassed. System directive entering final phase. Adrian stood alone inside his office. Outside the windows, electric lights covered the capital. Cars moved along paved streets. A radio broadcast carried music from another province. In the distance, aircraft navigation lights crossed the sky. Adrian closed his eyes. The system informed him that the original purpose of his authority had not been simple conquest. It had been survival. This world was approaching a technological threshold where industrial war could become catastrophic. Adrian felt cold. He knew exactly what that meant. He had lived in a world that had already crossed it. Machine guns, heavy artillery bombers, chemical weapons, mass mobilization, eventually weapons far worse. He had thought the system wanted him to conquer the world. Perhaps it had wanted something different. Someone capable of preventing the world from destroying itself while learning how powerful it had become. The next morning, Adrian canceled plans for another Western campaign. His generals were confused. Ardinia could probably win. That was precisely why he stopped. Instead, he proposed a continental congress, mutual borders, arms inspections, naval limitations, emergency communication lines, trade guarantees, rules for prisoners, restrictions on certain weapons. Some rulers laughed. Others accused him of weakness. Varelian newspapers claimed the Iron Emperor had become old. Adrian did not care. He knew what came after industrial rivalry if nobody built limits. So he did something his younger self would once have considered impossible. He used military superiority to negotiate restraint. It took years. Several crises nearly destroyed the process. Dravik threatened withdrawal. Varelia demanded naval equality. Sareth objected to inspections. Velmora wanted territorial concessions. Adrian compromised where compromise did not threaten survival, refused where it did. The Continental Security Compact was eventually signed by 7 major states. It did not end war, naive. Border conflicts continued. Political intrigue continued. Weapons development continued. But communication improved. Mobilizations became visible. Inspection systems reduced surprise attacks. Economic integration made major wars more expensive. For the first time, the continent possessed mechanisms designed to stop crises before armies marched. Marcus died before seeing the treaty completed. Adrian stood at his grave without guards. The old general had requested no statue. Adrian built one anyway, not of Marcus charging with a sword, not mounted on a horse. The statue showed him holding a field map. Marcus would have complained. Adrian considered that appropriate. Years later, Adrian returned to Greyhaven. The ruined province no longer existed. In its place stood one of the largest industrial cities in the world. Steel towers, rail yards, hospitals, factories, public parks, museums. The old fortress had been preserved. Adrian walked through it alone. Eventually, he reached the square where he had once climbed onto a shattered fountain and spoken to prisoners, wounded veterans, starving farmers, and abandoned workers. The fountain had been restored. Children played around it. None recognized him immediately. He was an old man now. Gray hair, slower movements, cane he disliked using. One boy pointed toward the statue standing nearby. It depicted a young Prince Adrian in a military coat. "That's Emperor Adrian," the child said proudly. Adrian looked at the statue. The face was too heroic, the posture ridiculous. "Doesn't look much like him," the boy frowned. "Have you met him?" Adrian smiled. Once or twice, the child pointed toward the nearby museum. "They say he conquered the world." Adrian looked across Greyhaven. Workers left factories. Students crossed bridges. Trains moved through the city. No soldiers marched. No banners burned. No artillery fired. He thought about every battlefield, every dead recruit, every ruined city, every machine built to defeat another machine. Then he looked back at the boy. No, the child seemed disappointed. Adrian continued. He conquered enough of it to learn that conquering everything would have been the easiest mistake. The boy clearly did not understand. That was fine. Children should not need to understand such things. Adrian left the square before anyone recognized him. That evening, he stood on a hill overlooking Greyhaven. The mechanical voice returned for the final time. No new weapon appeared. No new technology. No conquest objective. It simply confirmed that the civilization survival threshold had been achieved. The system would now terminate. Adrian remained silent. For decades, that voice had accompanied every transformation. From rifles to railways to armored vehicles, to fleets, to aircraft, to institutions. Now it faded. For the first time since reincarnation, Adrian was completely alone inside his own mind. He looked at the city below, then laughed softly. The system had given him knowledge. But knowledge had never built Greyhaven. People had the prisoners, the veterans, the miners, the engineers, the doctors, the soldiers, the farmers, the clerks, the teachers, millions of ordinary people whom the old world had considered insignificant. Adrian finally understood the greatest lesson of his second life. The system had never made him unstoppable. It had merely shown him what became possible when society stopped wasting human potential. He had been reincarnated as the most useless prince in the empire. A prince with magic, no respected army, no noble faction, no future. His enemies had mocked him. His brother had tried to murder him. 3 kingdoms had invaded him. A holy crusade had tried to erase him. The greatest navy in the world had attempted to strangle his empire. All of them believed power belonged to those who inherited it. Adrian proved something else. Power could be built, manufactured, organized, taught, shared. And once ordinary people learned how to build it together, no knight, king, priest, mage, or empire could ever return the world completely to what it had been. The useless prince had not conquered the world with a magical sword. He had conquered it with logistics, factories, railways, discipline, education, and the terrifying idea that tomorrow did not have to obey yesterday. Below him, Greyhaven's electric lights flickered on one district at a time. Adrian watched until the entire city glowed. Then the old emperor turned toward home.